everybody, happy Tuesday. Welcome to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon. Today is Tuesday, March 9th. We have an amazing lineup, as always, on TechStrong TV. Lots of great interviews today. I want to go ahead and get right on into them, starting with Alan's conversation with Ravi Dudukuru, who is the Chief Product Officer at DevGraph. They have a talk about DevGraph as a company and what it's doing. Now, so the folks at Dev Factory actually have acquired 135 different applications, and they've put them together as DevGraph, which is a comprehensive suite of dev tools, including Engine Yard. So Alan and Ravi talk about what the company is doing within the development space and how it's helping developers. Great conversation there. After that, Alan speaks with Grant Gudis, who is the chief scientist at GuardSquare, and he talks to Alan about how contact tracing apps, the good, the bad, and the ugly of them, and what the future may hold for them. You know, we all know that contact tracing apps have become kind of a little bit more of the conversation these days in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and so many conversations around contact tracing in helping stop the spread of COVID-19. And so this is a very, very relevant and timely conversation that Alan has with Grant. It's definitely one worth checking out. After that, we have the second in a series of conversations with members of the newly formed Value Stream Management Consortium. This one is with Helen Beale. Alan talks to Helen. She is the chair of the VSM consortium. She talks about why she founded this consortium and what the goals are. And if you don't know anything about value stream management, this is a very good conversation to take a listen to. Value stream management is definitely becoming a larger part of the DevOps conversation, especially in light of the new ways of working and businesses wanting to understand what the impact of all parts and processes are on the business at large. So value stream management is definitely coming into its own as a kind of a must-have, if you will, in a lot of organizations these days as they seek to derive value from every part of their organization. After that, we have the next in our DevOps Unbound series. This is a great conversation that Alan and Mitchell Ashley have with Kurt Chase, who is the Senior Director of Global Release Management at Tricentis, Charity Majors, who is the co-founder at Honeycomb, and Raven Manuel, who is the Senior Application Manager at the Smithsonian. They're going to talk about observability and continuous improvement. You know, observability at enterprise scale brings with it additional application lifecycle management requirements. And it can be difficult for some organizations to adopt it effectively. Success often requires knowing which changes resulted in improvements and which ones did not. So they talk about just the whole idea of continuous improvement and observability, how they work together, and offer up some tips and ideas that can help organizations in their continuous improvement processes. It's an interesting conversation. After that, as always, we have our Haunted Hacker podcast with Mike Jones. He talks, this is the second in a three-part series with David Lee, who is the AKA DC CyberSec, and they talk about InfoSec, cybersecurity, and all the cool things. And definitely, again, another one worth listening to. Mike Jones always has great conversations, so I always enjoy listening to his podcasts. After the Haunted Hacker podcast, we have our Something Old, which is from the recent Predict 2021 Virtual Summit. It features Matt Newfield, and he talks about cyber trust is hindsight. Our cyber trust hindsight is 2020. So if nothing else, if 2020 has taught us nothing else, it is that disruption can be unpredictable, and underscored and the importance of being prepared to be able to respond effectively. So Matt talks about the ways that organizations really have to kind of buckle down, if you will, and take a breath from 2020, having to deal with all of the cybersecurity issues that cropped up in 2020, recognizing that a lot of the same issues are going to be around in 2021. So it's really up to them to understand that a lot of the same risks are around. 5G, IoT, AI are going to bring with them a lot of new challenges for organizations as they adopt these new technologies, but they still have a lot of the same cybersecurity issues that they're dealing with. And obviously the shift to remote work in the light of COVID-19 has extended the attack surface for corporations which are now looking at having to lock down home networks in addition to their business networks. So Matt basically lets folks know that we're not out of the woods yet when it comes to cybersecurity and all the issues that we dealt with in 2020. It's really up to us to remain vigilant in 2021 and beyond to protect ourselves and our precious data from falling into the hands of the wrong folks. It's a great conversation and definitely a lot of food for thought there. After the Something Old segment, we have me coming back with the headlines for the day, and then I have a conversation with Chetan Mathur, who is the CEO of Next Pathway. Now, Next Pathway polled nearly 1,000 IT decision makers on their company status in their cloud migration process and what they perceive as the benefits and the challenges. So Chetan and I talk about the results of that poll, and it has some eye-opening results. Definitely one worth checking out. If your organization's anywhere still in a cloud migration process, then definitely want to give this one a listen. After that, I have a conversation with Mike Potter, who is the CEO of Rewind, and we talk about the importance of backing up data on GitHub and other similar sites. It's something we don't actually talk about a lot on DevOps.com, but it's data backups really should be occurring everywhere, including these particular sites, especially as organizations are storing more and more of their code on GitHub and other data repositories like that. Rewind actually acquired a company called BackHub that is enabling the company to do these GitHub backups. And so we talk about how the BackHub acquisition, sorry about that, is important to their lineup and also important to the developer community at large. So great conversation there. After that, I come back again for the webinar's preview, and then we dive into Mitch Ashley's Analyst Corner segment. And as always, he has some very insightful things to say, and definitely, again, another conversation worth checking out. After Mitch Ashley's Analyst Corner, I have The View from Vizard, The View with Vizard. Mike Vizard speaks with Sam Cochran, who is the senior software engineer at BuildKite. They talk about how big an impact Apple machines based on ARM processors will have on software development. That's really fascinating if you think about the fact that for so many years developers were not really considering doing a lot of application development and using Apple machines, but the ARM processors have really kind of changed the game for Apple's Sam and Mike discuss how really that is the changes that are going to be impacted or affected by that. So great conversation. All right. That is just a taste of what we have in store for you today. And we're going to get things kicked off right after this commercial message. All right, welcome back. Next up, we've got Alan Schimmel talking to Grant Goodes, who is the chief scientist at GuardSquare, talking about contact tracing apps. It's a great conversation and one totally worth checking out. So let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on another TechStrong TV segment. My guest this segment is Ravi Dudukuru. Ravi is CPO, and I just drew a blank on the company name. I'm going to ask Ravi to tell it. Ravi, welcome to TechStrong TV. I was concentrating on getting your name right, and I forgot the company name. I apologize.
That's all right, Adam.
Why don't you tell them the company?
So the company name, I'm Chief Product Officer at DevFactory, which is a software development company. And the product portfolio is DevGraph. And DevGraph is a suite of software development tools.
Excellent. So let's start with the company DevFactory. Give us a little, we've never interviewed anyone from DevFactory, certainly have not interviewed you before. Let's talk about, what is DevFactory, where you're based, how long you're in business, what are the kind of things you do?
DevFactory is a private equity owned company by Triology Group. What we do is acquire B2B SaaS companies, software as a service companies. And we've acquired so far 100 plus companies across the portfolio.
Wow.
And DevFactory's role is to develop the software, maintain it, and scale it. Because as you acquire 100 and as you plan to acquire more, it's all about scale. And DevFactory's role is to build the tools and processes to scale all these products and more that we're planning to acquire.
That's amazing. How long have you guys been at this?
It's actually more than 10 years. I think 15 years is in total. 10 years have been very active in acquisitions, and it's like a short end of the tail. In past 5 years, we acquired 80% of those acquisitions happened in past 5 years.
Wow. So if you've got, what did you say, about 100 acquisitions?
It's actually 135. 135 so far.
That is amazing. I back in the .com days, I worked at a company. We were a roll-up in hosting and infrastructure, and we did 30 acquisitions in 36 months. And I know what a breakneck pace that was, right? That was like one a month. So I can only imagine 135 in 5 years is just, that's a big due diligence team right there doing that. I know what's involved in these closings and acquisitions. What about during COVID? Has the pace kept up during COVID, or have you guys kind of slowed down a bit with COVID?
With COVID, we did, didn't slow down too much, but there was a general market slowdown. But even right before, until the COVID, we acquired so many companies that we had to integrate. So net of it, the pace kept going on. It's just that for first 9 months, I think it was a little slowdown, and then it's picking up again.
Yeah, I think people just had to get used to the new reality, the new normal of it. And Ravi, give us an idea. They're SaaS-based B2B applications for the most part. Give us a range of what some of these are.
It's actually the most interesting part from our audience perspective, right? Is these companies are, more than companies, let's focus on the product. These products come in different shapes. Some of them are truly on-prem. You got to install your SQL Server, you got to install C# and .NET Framework and all that stuff. And some of these come from, all the way up to the cloud. So there is a variation in the middle as well. The challenge here is when we acquire and onboard a product or portfolio, to run it as smoothly as possible. And we do anything from lift and shift the infrastructure to AWS, to sometimes rewriting the whole product in a cloud native format without any of the old stuff. And anything in between, with the whole goal of running it more efficiently, faster, and at scale.
Understood. But in terms of functionality, where are these enterprise level sort of functionality? Are they mid-level? I mean, they're B2B. I mean, what is, what's the range there?
So the real story, Alan, is it is all anywhere from medium business to enterprise. That's the target customer base. And the product vary across segments, all the way from CRM down to the project management systems to running stuff on containers like Engineered, which is a truly platform as a service. But that's where this whole concept of DevGraph comes into the picture. Because in order for us to scale internally, in order for us to run these things smoothly, we built a level of unified infrastructure, and we built a set of processes, and we built a set of tooling around all these products. So once you have a product, how do you onboard it and how do you run it smoothly? Tools, processes, and the infrastructure. So when you get these things right across 135 products, there is something that we can offer to the entire industry, or all the other people who are developing software. And that's what DevGraph is all about. For example, Engineered. We run our infrastructure on Engineered. It's a platform as a service. It abstracts a level of complexity away from AWS and helps you run the infrastructure smoothly. And we run our products on Engineered, for example. Then the second example we have is something called DevSpaces, which is truly your IDE, the integrated development environment, running in a container on the cloud in your browser. So that whenever somebody needs to touch a code, they don't have to go to Git, set up the whole local infrastructure, pull it and build it and all that. It's just you click one button on the browser, it opens your IDE, you finish your coding and be done. That's how we really scale. And that's the whole best practices we learned over years. We put together as a set of products that's called DevGraph. And it's super exciting. It's both on the development side and on the deployment side. We have tools on both sides.
Understood. Excuse me. So DevGraph, it's the framework. Is that fair to say? It's a framework that Dev Factory themselves are using to help scale, 135 different applications eventually, right? Across but though you're using it internally as such, you're also offering it as a product/service to the market as well.
Yeah. So to be very clear, what we do internally is what we learned in order to build these products. What we're offering as a DevGraph is a set of products, very specific products that span across the entire software development lifecycle, from inception, product management, all the way to deploying it in the cloud. For example, we have Fogbugs to start your project management. And then you have you have DevSpaces to run your code, to do the development in the browser. And then you have Engineered to deploy your application either on EC2 instances or on containers without any DevOps. It's fairly smooth and simple to do. And once you deploy it, for example, we have databases. All our databases are run by one small team of 10 people centrally across all the products. And in order to achieve the level of performance we need on databases, we use our own product called Scalark, which does load balancing, query caching, all those performance enhancing, high availability features. And then once you are done with all that, the cloud cost is one thing we keep an eye on. We spend multiple $1 million on cloud on AWS bill every single year. One of the things we take seriously is how do we manage that at right scale. To manage that, we have a product called Cloud Fix, which goes and monitors your cloud infrastructure. The first thing it does is it identifies all the opportunities you have, whether you're over provisioning, you're storing too much. It identifies those opportunities and say, hey, do you need to keep this? Or is there any way you can right size this? And then once you click a button, it just goes and automatically right sizes the whole infrastructure. So I hope I gave you that sense of how do we start from planning a product or a project to developing it in the browser and IDE, to deploying it and to managing it at scale. So the whole suite of products is DevGraph.
Got it. So there's really, I mean, and the thing about it is it's battle tested from your own proving ground, right? This is what you guys have actually, you talk about drinking your own champagne or eating your own dog food. This is the actual products that you've built based upon your experience. So it's a great thing. How is the suite offered in terms of a service? Is it per application you're using it for, or is it just one size fits all? How would you sell such a thing?
We realize that not everybody just wants to wake up and solve all the problems. So customers are free to pick and choose. If they want to improve the database performance, they can. And if they want to do only the cloud cost optimization with CloudFix, they can. Or if they want us to help them with the entire suite of products, and entire suite of products really means you're touching an entire organization, from development to QA to planning and deployment, the whole thing. And if somebody wants help with that, we do the whole thing for them with the whole set of products. And by the way, going back to Alan, the breaking thing, we actually broke our product so many times. Before we released this cloud cost optimization, we scanned 45,000 AWS accounts before we even released it to the world. And similarly, on Scalar, we ran 10,000 simultaneous connections to the database before we released Scalar to the rest of the world. And 10,000 simultaneous connections is a lot. You can run a lot of stuff on 10,000 simultaneous connections.
I understand. But you know what else I've learned? I've been in technology 30 years, Ravi. The best way to learn is breaking, right? As a matter of fact, I spent 20 years in security. And I will tell you that today it's a little different. People go to school to become cybersecurity people. When I was doing security, no, they didn't have school for security, right? Most people who were into security because they like to break things and then try to put it back together better, right? And so I think that's how you learn best. Sometimes it's the most painful lessons, but you learn best. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to, for people who want to get more information, where do they go?
It's devgraph.com, DEVGRAPH, devgraph.com. And we list all the products by software development stage. And you can learn about each individual product and then go from there.
Absolutely. And what about Dev Factory? Is it devfactory.com?
Yes, DevFactory is devfactory.com, but DevFactory is the company. DevGraph is
is the product.
Yep.
I got it. Just wanted to see, sometimes people like to get the company background or whatever. Hey, Ravi, thanks for coming on and explaining this to us and enlightening us about what's happening with DevGraph. And there's some, I want to say household names, but in our industry anyway, household names there, like Engine Yard, etc. So keep us posted. It sounds fantastic. And thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV.
Will do. Thanks a lot, Alan. Take care.
Thank you. Okay. Ravi Dudakuru, the CPO, Dev Factory, talking about DevGraph here on TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Next up, we have the second in a series of conversations with members of the newly formed Value Stream Management Consortium. This one is with the chair of the consortium, Helen Beale. She talks about why she founded the Value Stream Management Consortium and what its goals are. So let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another TechStrong TV segment. My guest for this segment is Grant Goods. Grant is Chief Scientist at GuardSquare. Grant, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you very much. It's good to be on.
It's a pleasure to have you here, man. Anybody who has a Star Trek background is good by me, so welcome. Grant, you know, I don't know if we've ever interviewed anyone from GuardSquare on here, so why don't we start there? Why don't you give us a little background on GuardSquare and maybe a little of your own personal background on, you know, how you got to be chief scientist?
Yeah, so GuardSquare's primary product offerings are mobile app security. The history of the company is that our founders created something called ProGuard, which is an open source tool used to initially just optimize Java applications for Android, but eventually applying some name obfuscation and other security features. And that was eventually extended to our full-on products for Java and iOS to provide effectively obfuscation technology, RASP, one-time application self-protection. So, and now we're moving beyond just application protection and into other aspects, and like ThreatCast is one of the recent product offerings, which allows real-time monitoring of attacks as they're in progress and other threats. So that's GuardSquare. My background originally was in compilers, compiler technology with IBM and Java Virtual Machine, but I've moved for the last dozen years or so. I've been working in the broader field of application security, working on white box cryptography, other obfuscation technologies, and I joined GuardSquare last year as the chief scientist, and essentially I'm responsible for developing our future technologies, our ideas of how to extend our technology beyond just the tools that we currently have.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. So Grant, we're going to talk a little bit today about contact tracing, some of the ramifications of it in terms of privacy, in terms of efficacy, and, you know, in terms of should we be doing it basically, or what, you know, beyond every day is another day closer, hopefully, to putting COVID a little bit further in our mirror. But, you know, beyond COVID even, what are the uses, non-uses, what should be acceptable in terms of social interacting, you know, kind of apps like a contact tracing app. I will say from the outset that I actually loved the idea of the contact tracing apps when when Apple and Google early on in COVID first said, hey, they're going to help by kind of building this functionality into both iOS and Android. And of course, you know, there's plenty of room for abuse here.
Absolutely.
Right? So let's hear your take on these things and what you guys are doing, and talk to us.
Well, I think contact tracing as a response to the COVID pandemic was very interesting for a number of reasons, but I think it represents a relatively rare example of government institutions and health authorities turning to the crowdsourcing realm to solve a problem. I mean, the standard approach to some sort of a virus incursion would be to identify the patients who are suffering from it, do manual contact tracing, actually interview the people, find all the people they talk to. That's what you would have done back in the classic days of disease that was just breaking out into the population. But due to the huge scale of COVID and its global nature, this kind of manual version didn't really work. So governments quickly and health authorities quickly came up with the idea of maybe crowdsourcing it, basically putting an app on your phone that would let you self-report and self-diagnose that you might need to go get tested because you've been in contact with someone. The initial attempts at this were fairly problematic. The UK was a good example. Both not very well-designed apps and also very, very privacy invasive. They were using GPS location data, tracking your every movement, requiring you to self-identify using things like passport and name and address. And then gathering that information in a central server and processing it. Everyone really
what could go wrong?
Exactly. What could go wrong? And so it's actually very interesting. And the Google and Apple stepped in and basically said, you know what, we can build an operating system level feature that does this in a very, very well-designed, sensitive to privacy needs way, doesn't gather GPS data, just uses contact via using the Bluetooth to identify close proximity, a few meters, using anonymized identifiers that were not your personal ID, and not tracking it on the server, but really allowing the device to contain all the information. So this new API that they introduced was really a watershed moment. I think it's a return to Google's original motto of "do no evil," which we've come to somewhat doubt in the last few years. So, and also an example of Apple and Google collaborating, which is almost unheard of. So the fact that the names were both on it, this was vetted by security and privacy experts. The design and the security and privacy concerns are really well addressed. But what we did recently was we did a large survey of COVID contact tracing apps, looking at them from how they were designed. First of all, did they even use the Google Apple API? And we found that about 40% of the over 80 apps that we looked at on both platforms did not use the Google Apple API, even as recently as last month or so. And the ones that didn't use it were using, in most cases, either GPS or a combination of GPS and Bluetooth information. And of those, even some of them required very, very invasive personal identification information, such as I said, passport ID, national IDs, address. So honestly, I think the root of success for such an approach, the contact tracing approach, is that it has to be trusted. You need a huge uptake. You need the vast majority of people with appropriate mobile devices to both install and use the app. If you don't get that trust, you won't get the uptake. And if people find out that the app is gathering your GPS location data, they won't trust it, and they probably won't download it and install it. So then the whole process of contact tracing by crowdsourcing will fail. So if you are not using the Apple Google API, our premise is you should be securing that app as best you can to prevent any exploits, to prevent third parties from gaining access to the information that you're gathering.
Absolutely. A couple things. First of all, good, bad, or indifferent on these contract tracing apps. The fact of the matter is, at least in the US, I think we've been an abject failure in contract tracing in general. I think a lot of local municipalities, counties, states kind of threw in the towel and stopped. They didn't even bother. They didn't. I mean, they were, when the numbers were so god awful that everyone was exposed to someone, it seemed, at some level. And so we never even gave these things a chance to really do their thing. The only place I can think of that I've seen where we actually did do contact tracing was the NFL. I don't know if you're familiar. I'm a football fan. The NFL had all their players and coaches, whenever they were in facility, wear that, it looked like a watch, but it was just a red-green light thing. And they used that for contact tracing when someone was positive to see who was in close contact with that player or coach.
I agree. There's been a massive failure globally for this approach to work, partly because, what you're referring to at the local health authority level is generally manual tracing, which is case by case. Someone gets in the hospital, they're sick. They want to interview that person, talk to everyone they've been in contact with. But due to the due to the nature of this disease and how easy it is to be infected by minimal contact, you're talking, the scale doesn't work. You end up with hundreds and hundreds of people you have to interview. If you're in a very isolated place, an island, remote northern community, this approach is fine. And in the NFL case, is also fine because they really sequestered a relatively small group of 100 or less people and followed them very closely. But if you scale that up to an entire multi-million population
People.
city, it just doesn't work. That's why the mobile approach was supposed to be a godsend, because essentially you're outsourcing that to the phones, to the individuals. You're not forcing the health authorities to track it down individually. The approach can work, and it has worked in some locations. The problem has been the lack of uptake and trust. Partly uptake is limited by you have to be on a more recent phone. You have to be on an Apple or a Google phone. You can't be using a BlackBerry as my wife does. That just doesn't work. Then you have to have the most recent and updated operating system for the API to be available. So that automatically eliminates a certain percentage of the population, even leaving aside those people who don't even have a mobile device.
Right.
So if you don't get something, health authorities estimate you need something on the order of 50 to 70% of the people that could install it to install it for it to be useful. And we're just not getting to those numbers. And I think it's a bit of the reputation issue. You only get one chance at being trusted. If you violate that trust, people are going to be very, very suspicious.
Absolutely.
And because the contact tracing apps initially tried a roll your own approach, failed to deliver products that were sensitive to people's privacy needs, there was a sense of distrust. And subsequently, because it didn't seem to be functioning, people say, well, why should I bother? So I think this pandemic, it was a learning experience. I think going forward, health authorities and governments will be aware that this approach can work. You just have to get it right from day one. You have to address people's privacy concerns. You have to really be open about what you're doing and how you're using the information. You can't do what some of the countries have done in Central America and South America and Far East, where you basically say, we will use this information for health, but we may also use it for purposes of investigations for crime. If you say to the people, we may use the information that the contact tracing app is gathering to determine if you are guilty of a robbery, they're not going to install it. Not that we're all going out and robbing banks, but you just don't like that level of invasion of your privacy.
Understood. So can you point to some places, though, that have done this right, you think, or if not right, at least have had some modicum of success?
Well, there are basically all of the locales nationally that have used the Apple and Google API. They really have done a proper job. It does work. The app, as I said, it's not gathering sensitive information. People are installing them. I know anecdotally of several people in my location, which is Ottawa, Canada, that have made use of the information they've gotten back from the app and gone in and got tested. In most cases, there's been no problem because the contact tracing is actually saying you're within several meters, potentially, of someone who was infected. That's generally not enough to be infected, but better safe than sorry. Go get the test. And testing is the cheapest way to address this virus rather than trying to lock everyone down all the time. That ultimately doesn't scale. So testing, if it could be directed to those people who are potentially exposed, is a much better approach. It just has to be reliable. It has to be covering a goodly percentage of those that potentially are infected. And so I would say many approaches could work. The Google Apple's API is what we recommend from a privacy protection perspective. But other approaches are possible it's just that you must secure the app. And again, we're trying to generate end user trust in the app. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
Got it. Glenn, let's move beyond COVID. I wish we could. I pray we will sooner than later. But, this technology has potential beyond just tracking people for crimes, right? Obviously, people aren't going to sign up for that. We're, a year from now, COVID's a little bit, further back in our rearview mirror. What are we using contact tracing technology for?
Well, in general, I mean, it doesn't have to be a pandemic for you to be concerned about contacts. As we're familiar with, we are right in the middle of flu season right now. Under normal circumstances, we would be in our jobs, at our offices, but occasionally being exposed to someone who has a bad flu and then getting sick ourselves. As well, we have people with children. Their children are going to school, getting exposed to a vast potential pool of disease vectors. So if we trusted contact tracing as a tool for a pandemic, it's possible for us to use it for just day-to-day life as well, to determine when someone who ends up getting sick has to go home, stay at home, the people around them who may have been exposed to the same virus, not necessarily COVID, could also use that information to take proactive measures, possibly to isolate. So you would end up with, as you know, sometimes in the past, someone gets sick and it just can go through an office and everyone ends up getting it. It takes weeks, but eventually everyone gets it. We could avoid that kind of domino effect where the person that initially gets it reports that they had an illness, and the people that potentially were exposed may only be a few, self-isolate, and that's a few days later they can come back to work, everything's good. So we could reduce the level of general illness in workplaces, schools, etc., just by this technique.
Absolutely. I think the key is, forewarned is forearmed, right? A lot of the stuff around COVID kind of snuck up and banged us over the head because we weren't prepared. As we might have had public health people saying this could happen and Bill Gates and everything, but we really weren't prepared. I would hope, God willing, or God forbid, that we have to face a similar situation in the future, that we'll learn the lessons of this and we would be prepared with things like contact tracing done right from using our phones, which are ubiquitous like that.
Yeah.
Of course, time will tell. But
I agree. And I like to bring up the point that this whole idea of crowdsourcing, which is, it's been relatively explored in certainly in places like, Silicon Valley as a way to potentially introduce new technologies to the world. But crowdsourcing for medical purposes is a fantastic idea because you get the power of numbers. So I think we'll see more of this sort of approach. And also, I think it shows that governments and health authorities can trust somewhat to the private sector to get those jobs done. I mean, let's face it, governments haven't done the best job of bringing medical systems into the 21st century. Even just electronic records for medical appointments and your doctor and everything are not available in most jurisdictions. They have struggled mightily to computerize our health system. I think this idea of maybe pushing it out to the mobile devices that everyone has, if you could keep your own medical records in your Google Cloud, and if it was safe and reliable and trustworthy, that might solve the problem. It might solve the problem that the governments, everyone from Australia to Canada to the US, has attempted to computerize their medical records, and largely speaking, they have failed. So I think this speaks to a future. Mobile devices are here to stay. They are becoming, if not already are, ubiquitous. And I think the next step is, after ubiquitous, you need them to be trustworthy. And Google and Apple made a big step towards that with their API. And maybe, just maybe, the next pandemic, we'll just be able to start from the outset with a contact tracing app that works, and we'll knock it off in the early stages rather than waiting to the end.
I hope so. Hey, Grant, thanks for coming on. For people who want to get more information about the company, what's the URL?
We are at guardsquare.com, and our company is located in Leuven, Belgium, along with a sales office in Boston. But please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to talk to you about application security for mobile devices.
Excellent. Grant Good, Chief Scientist at GuardSquare here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back. Next up is another episode of DevOps Unbound. This one is with Alan Schimmel and Mitchell Ashley talking with Kurt Chase of Tricentis, Charity Majors of Honeycomb, and Raven Manuel of the Smithsonian, and they're talking about observability and continuous improvement. It's a great, great conversation and totally worth checking out. Let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, welcome to another TechStrong TV segment. I'm really happy to be joined by one of my friends in the DevOps world for almost as long as we're doing DevOps.com. My friend Helen Beale, coming at us from UK today. Good morning, or good afternoon to you, Helen. How are you?
Morning to you. I'm really well. I'm really happy to be here. It's always such a pleasure to chat with you, Alan.
Yeah, it's always great to see you. Helen, look, we're here today to talk about the announcement around the Value Stream Management Consortium. And lo and behold, my friend Helen Beale is the chairwoman, whatever you want to say, chair of the Value Stream Management Consortium. So tell us, Helen, what's this all about?
Well, let me give you some background. I think, as you know, I spent quite a few years doing DevOps consulting all around Europe and the Middle East, and really thoroughly enjoyed that. And as part of what I was doing with organizations, I was doing lots of value stream mapping exercises, and quite often, frankly, getting a little bit frustrated with teams that did a value stream mapping exercise and then never kind of went back and looked at it again. It was such an intensive physical exercise that they would never revisit it. And I was also doing lots of things like metrics workshops, so working with teams to try and identify which metrics were going to be useful for them and where they were going to get them from and how they were going to use them. And all these things were happening. And I had a slide, and at the bottom of it, I'd written optimizing the flow from idea to value realization. So that's kind of where I was at. And then summer 2019, I went to the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London, and I went on a press pass as an InfoQ reporter. I do some writing as a DevOps editor for InfoQ. And I had a plan to interview several value stream management companies. And I did. And I had an epiphany, like a real wow kind of moment where loads of things fell into place. And I kind of realized that value stream management had the potential to cure a lot of these problems that I was feeling as a DevOps consultant. It was going to enable people to automate the value stream map, which meant that they would be able to revisit it and inspect it much more frequently. It was going to provide them with access to the metrics that they wanted to use and be able to experiment with metrics. So had this kind of epiphany moment, as I said. And one of the people I met was Jeff Kais from Tutora. And he and I really hit it off, and we started work together. A few months later, I started providing some strategic advisory services. And then something else happened in April 2020 when DevOps Institute started doing Skill Up Days. The very first one they did in April last year was on value stream management. And I was working as chief ambassador as well at that time. And afterwards, I seemed to find myself in lots of one-to-one meetings talking about this emerging segment around value stream management. So I ended up going back to Jeff and Bob Davis, also the CMO at Futura, and I asked them if they'd ever thought of setting up a consortium in this space, because it felt like it needed it. It felt like it was emerging and needed some help to kind of birth properly, if that's not too weird a way of putting it. And they said, yes, Helen, we absolutely have. We've been trying to do something for about a year and we haven't got anywhere. Would you like to try and do something with it? And so I said yes. And now we are here with a company, effectively. So it's a not-for-profit trade association registered in Denver, Colorado. And we are going to be a members association, effectively, and we are the Value Stream Management Consortium.
I love it. Great story. Helen, look, our audience is fairly well versed around DevOps, cyber, cloud native, transformation. And value stream management is a word or phrase that gets put around quite a bit, right? But here's the thing. I don't know how many people hear it. They think they know what it is. They may know what it is, or they don't know what it is, but they're afraid to say, right? Because they don't want to come across as not cool or not up on the latest stuff. If you don't mind, as the chair of the Value Stream Management Consortium, how would you define value stream management for our audience?
Well, I think to reflect on what you said at the start before I go on to some kind of definition of it, I think you're absolutely bang on. I think it is a new phrase, and I think it's easily confused with value stream mapping. In fact, I just came off a recording for a panel with a group of experts, and there was absolutely that confusion going on. People hear value stream and they think mapping, and they don't think that there's a separate thing called management. And this is really part of what the Value Stream Management Consortium is here to do, is to help define what these things are. Is it about people? Is it about process? Is it about tools or platforms? And the answer to that is all of the above. I think there is some resistance in the market to identifying another new role as like a value stream manager or a value stream architect, a value stream lead, although I know of people like Brian Finster, who is one of our strategic board advisors at Value Stream Management Consortium, that has that job title. One of our ambassadors, BMK at the Bank of New Zealand, has just become a value stream architect as well. So he's very excited about that. So there is a strong people element around this. There is a strong process element as well. So what are we doing when we're managing our value stream? What does that mean? Does it mean that we're inspecting it? Does it mean we have certain processes around what to do when we discover certain things, like certain waste items? What do we do? Do we apply error budgets to it around our flow metrics, for example? What are the management practices and processes look like? And then finally, there's the platform piece, which is, for me, one of the most exciting parts, because that's when I said about automating the value stream map, that's what we're doing there. We're effectively connecting parts of the DevOps tool chain in a way that we've not ever really been able to do before without an enormous amount of heavy lifting. So what the value stream management platforms do is allow us to integrate the various components of our value stream and our DevOps tool chain, which means that we can gain insights from the moment we've had an idea through all of the steps, through the CI/CD pipeline, through into the service desk, into monitoring, observability, and our alerting tools, and allow us to have an end-to-end view of the life cycle. And for years, I talked to people about DevOps dashboards, and there are some technologies that are fairly well established out there, like Hygeia. But the problem with a dashboard is it's effectively a skin over the top in its core functionality. What it's doing is just pulling data out of individual tools. It's not connecting the tools, which allows us to have insights into the end-to-end flow and the cycle time of that value. I think a big part of, for me, what I'd like us to work on, and I should mention as well, along with the launch of the Value Stream Management Consortium, we're also launching the State of Value Stream Management report. So there is some research we've started as well. And broadly, we're trying to discover two things in that research. One is about flow, and the other is about realization of value. So we're trying to understand how people measure flow, whether they're just using value stream mapping, whether they're using tools, whether they're using spreadsheets or VSM platforms, how they are measuring the flow of their value in the value stream. And then from the realization perspective, we're trying to understand how people are estimating what value they're going to receive from the work that they're doing, whether they're writing benefits hypotheses in user stories, whether things are happening at a very high level at the portfolio level, and then really importantly, what they're doing to measure the realization of that value. So how are they figuring out if their experiment had the outcome that they thought it was going to have, or whether it varied, and then what they're going to do accordingly. So there's a long definition. Forrester have got a quite good one, and they talk about the kind of people process tools around the concept of a value stream, but it's not value stream mapping. That is a lean activity that helps us visually collaborate. It's very human driven, very, very valuable. I don't want to dismiss it, but it has some limitations which value stream management really takes us away from.
Excellent. That was really good, Helen. I appreciate it. So we interviewed I always call him Plutora, Jeff Kies yesterday from Plutora on this, and he mentioned, I think there were 5 founding, let's call them vendor members: Plutora, TaskTop, IBM HCL was 3, and the other 2 are
AI.
ServiceNow, of course, we can't forget them. What was the last one?
Digital.ai.
Digital.ai. So great, 5 great vendors, and we think of value stream management. They're the ones that really come to mind. But we were trying to talk with Jeff about, non-vendor members, participants, advisors. You mentioned someone in your previous answer. Give us an idea beyond the 5, founding vendor members. Who else is sort of associated with this consortium?
It's a really pertinent question, actually, Alan, because our initial vision for the consortium is that we would launch with more customer or enterprise members. But when we started to explore the process involved with that, and then anybody that's sold anything to an enterprise will know how long it takes to get on the supplier list and get approvals and all of that kind of stuff. So we also really wanted to approach the delivery of the consortium in a really agile manner. So we actually had a minimum viable product and that we wanted to go to market with. So what we've done is we've gone to market with our 5 vendors, and they are all working behind the scenes to bring a small handful, 1 or 2 of their customers on board immediately. And we already have a few of them. We didn't have enough across the board in order to be able to announce them all together, but that will be in the next wave of membership. And talking of membership, we have 3 levels of membership effectively, and the top 2 levels are really for corporates, whether that is what you would call an end user enterprise or whether that is a vendor enterprise doesn't really matter. So membership is open now for all organizations to join, and then we have a whole level of influencer or individual members as well. So if you work for a company but they're not willing to pay for membership, we have a lower cost entry level membership option for individuals. And then we have our strategic board advisors. So we have some very well-known people in the industry, Brian Finster. We also have Steve Pereira and Alistair Watkins, who are all helping guide us as we make choices about things like where to focus our research, what levels of membership we should have, how we should position ourselves in the market. So we're very lucky to have some non-vendor representation already, and that's only set to increase. Now membership is open to all.
Fantastic. So your role as chair, let's talk about that if you don't mind a little bit.
Sure. So I kind of self-nominated as chair initially because I was the one driving this forward. The membership program and bylaws that we have allow for basically nomination of voting like in any membership association. So I may or may not be chair forever. Time will only tell. But my role really has been quite similar to my role as Chief Ambassador at DevOps Institute, actually. I've often described myself as a herder of humans. So what I've been doing is effectively, I guess, building the Value Stream Consortium, Management Consortium in its current form, helping everyone get together, what our mission well, we built a founder prospectus and took that to market. We signed up this initial set of vendors to help us get funding to do the things that we needed to do around the legals, around the getting a website built, getting some PR done, getting the research started, all of those things. So we now have the board of directors in place. So we have a board director from each of the vendor members. Jeff is also treasurer. And we meet, as you would expect any organizational company to do. We meet and we do board minutes and we make decisions about what we're going to invest in, what our business plan is going to look like, what we're spending, and all of those normal kind of day-to-day business running activities that you would expect.
Absolutely. Website, you mentioned the website. Why don't we tell people what's the address for that?
It's going live tomorrow at 8 a.m. Eastern.
And the URL is?
The URL is vsmconsortium.org.
So Value Stream Management, vsmconsortium.org.
Yep.
Excellent. Very cool. Helen, I guess my last question, because we're running low on time, is, so this is early March. Let's say by July, hopefully by July the world's in a little better place vis-a-vis COVID and vaccines and everything. What would success look like here for the consortium? How would you define success?
So there's a couple of things. One is really membership and one is research. So we'd be looking to get more members signed up, of course, and that would be some enterprise corporate members and some vendor corporate members. So we are looking for more members and we'd love to get our individual membership up as well. In order to get that membership up, we need to keep on building on the benefits packages for those membership items or membership communities. So what we are looking at next is things like learning. So we'll be looking at Value Stream Management Foundation courses and certifications, and then advanced level Value Stream qualifications as well. As part of that learning, we'll be building out playbooks and materials and membership benefits. One of the big pieces of work as well is, of course, the research. So the research is scheduled to go live as a report around May 10th is what we're aiming for at the moment. So we probably won't keep that as a members benefit because we think it's too important for the community at the moment. So that will be open to all to read that research. So July time, that research should have gone live. Hopefully we'll have had a good response to it from the market. Hopefully we'll have found something that's useful and of value to the market in the data that we collect as well. And hopefully we'll have some more members that are allowing us to invest more in making this market happen.
Very cool. All right, Helen, we're out of time. I've got to end this now. But A, congratulations. B, I couldn't think of a better person to lead this than you. So I'm sure you're going to do a bang-up job with it. And we're going to be watching over the next months, weeks, to see, what's the impact here of the consortium. You'll have to come back and keep us, up to date on what's happening.
We would love to. We'd certainly love to share the research with you.
Great. All right. Helen Beale, chairperson for the Value Stream Management Consortium. Here on TechStrong TV, this is Alan Schimmel. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with our next guest. Hey everyone, I'm Alan Schimmel, and welcome to another DevOps Unbound. We have a great panel in store for you today here on DevOps Unbound. Our topic is observability at a broad level. We're going to jump into some of this. Let me first of all introduce you though. First, I want to introduce you, of course, to my co-host of DevOps Unbound. He's the CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, CTO here at MediaOps. My friend Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitch, welcome.
Alan, thanks. Great to be here.
All righty. Let me introduce you to our panel for today. We have a great panel. I was so happy that this came together. First, coming at us from the mountains of Virginia, by way of the Bronx, right? Raven Manuel. Raven, why don't you introduce yourself and where you work?
Absolutely. My name is Raven Manuel, and I work for the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which is part of the Smithsonian. I am the senior application developer and DevOps engineer. And thanks for not putting me in West Virginia. I appreciate that.
Okay. I don't blame you. Next up, we have the one and only Charity Majors, CTO, co-founder at Honeycomb. Charity, little bit about yourself, maybe introduce to the audience.
I am an ops nerd. I've been on call since I was 17, racking hardware. I no longer rack hardware anymore. Hardware doesn't exist as far as I'm concerned. Instead, trying to save the world through better observability.
Excellent. And then last but not least, we have Kurt Chase of Tricentis, the Tricentis release team. Kurt, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's Kurt Chase. I'm currently head of global release management at Tricentis, based in Northern California. Nice to join you all today.
Nice to have you here, Kurt. All right. So team, panel, our topic this week is observability. And given that is the topic, I feel compelled to start with Charity. Because Charity, in many ways, you and the Honeycomb team are responsible for all this buzz around observability. Tell us about it.
Yeah, a little bit. When we started the company a little over 5 years ago, it was not a term that was really used in tech. Now, which is not to say that we invented it, far from it. But it has this long and impressive pedigree in mechanical engineering, specifically like control theory. And in control theory, observability is the mathematical dual of controllability. So we started building this startup, Honeycomb, and we knew that what we were doing wasn't monitoring, right? We knew that we weren't reactively monitoring. We knew that it was about instrumenting the code, getting from the inside. But for the first 5-6 months, couldn't figure out what to call. It was really hard to figure out how to talk about what we were doing. And then it was mid-July, midway through the first year, when I remember Googling, what is the definition of observability? And when I read it, it's all about, can you understand what's happening on the inside of a system just by looking at it from the outside with no prior knowledge? And light bulbs just started going off. I was like, ding, ding, ding. That's what we're trying to build, right? That's exact. If you translate that into software terms, what it means is, can you explain any system state that your system can get into without shipping new code to handle that state? Because shipping that code to handle that state implies that you had prior knowledge. So it's all about the unknown unknowns, right? Instead of the known unknowns. So yeah, that's my story.
And you're sticking with it. So
yeah, I think that it really encapsulates, a lot of the problems that people are increasingly having. There's a lot that proceeds from that definition of unknown unknowns, like you need to have high cardinality, high dimensionality, blah, 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 all this stuff. But those are the things that speak to, the problems of microservices and multiple storage systems, et cetera.
I get it. So Raven, this is your life, right? How does this observability and what Charity is described as the fact pattern or the problem pattern that she came to call observability, how does that, in your life day to day of what you're doing, how does that kind of manifest itself?
Thanks, Charity, for actually providing a definition, because I was like, okay, are we supposed to define our own meaning of observability? So you've given a baseline. And I like that you said that it's not monitoring, because I can actually feel the nuance. There's a nuance between monitoring and observability. And what's really interesting is that that's a problem that I'm trying to solve today at work, because we've got the black boxes, right? So you've got observability, but when you have software, there's a lot of black boxes. You're not supposed to be asking what's going on inside the code, because you're not supposed to know what's going on inside the code. But when you get you put a signal in. I was in the military, so I did electronic repair. So you put the signal in and you don't get the right signal out, but you've got a black box.
Yep.
Like, how do you know what went wrong there if you can't actually observe what's going on inside of there? It's one thing to know the state of the software when you are the developer. So as a developer, yes, I know. But when it comes to being the product owner or the project manager or a stakeholder, and you're trying to figure out why is this doing this? Or this is not what I wanted, actually, is how that would come from that end, is that's not what I wanted. So how to get the stakeholders to get what they want when you can't actually tell, like I can't tell what the code from my coworker is doing. So in a way, observability is it is abstracted from monitoring, because monitoring is telling you what it's doing, but it isn't telling you the state. And so it's a problem that I'm trying to solve actually today.
I was going to jump in here and say, from my experience, although monitoring, logging, reporting, alerting, they're not observability. I think they are fundamental foundational pieces that you have to have in place. You can start observability without any of them, but I've found that the more you can get your monitoring, reporting, and even get some alerting going, it allows you to then start observing the system. And for me, it's what I know at Splunk, and now here again at Tricentis, I'm really trying to connect all the pieces, because it's not just about the applications, but I find that some of the DevOps engineers, they really help with observability, especially the ones that are super inquisitive, and they don't just, when a result appears or something happens, they don't just take it at face value. They're inquisitive, they dig in, they try and find the root cause. And I think that's key with observability, is taking all the monitoring, reporting, alerting you have, taking the feedback you have from your customers, all of that comes together, I think, to really help you start to define those unknown unknowns that Charity brought up. I think it becomes very complicated. And then I think I'd love to talk about how AI and machine learning now can start to learn some of these things, because I think we get really good at repeatable incidences, observing those and then accounting for those in our systems, but it's the unknown unknowns. How do we deal with those? That's the real interesting part to me nowadays, for sure.
It is, I think, the interesting part. And I also think that AI ops is mostly bullshit, and it will be for the foreseeable future.
For a while, I agree,
But I wanted to circle back to what you said about, logging and everything, which is, so there's a technical definition for observability, which has to do with high cardinality and all this stuff. And then there is just understanding your systems, right? Yeah. And I absolutely agree, like you need some alerting, you need some monitoring. I think that the question is it log files? Is it metrics? Yeah. That's kind of irrelevant. They're just data, right? What's important is, can you understand what's happening in your system when you need to understand it? And I do think it's important to sort of differentiate the technical definition of observability from just the tendency that we have to say observing things, because there's a very rich and mature and well-established set of best practices for monitoring, which are in many cases completely mirror opposite from the best practices for observability. Like, for example, with monitoring, it's like for years we've been saying, you should not have to stare at graphs all day. The system should inform you when you need to, when there's something wrong, right? It's super, canonical best practice. But with observability, it's exactly the opposite. We're saying that, most problems that happen are so subtle that you need to be looking for them, right? You can't page everyone at the threshold. Like, you would drive them nuts if you're like, oh, every little thing is going wrong, bing, bing, bing. You drive people nuts and they would quit, right? But when you're an engineer, when you're working on this endpoint, or when you're trying to solve this problem, you should absolutely be looking through, asking questions, iterating on them, and looking for the trails in your observability tool at that very fine-grained level.
I agree.
So, I hear what all three of you said, and it's funny, how everyone brings their own baggage to this issue. No, it's not. Don't be sorry. I love it. Here's I think fundamentally, for those people out here who are watching this home, I got a lot of people out here who are DevOps people, who are ops folks, SREs, cyber folks, and their heads are spinning, because I think there's a little bit of what Kurt said to them, which is they do a shitty job monitoring. Quite frankly, we don't do a great job of it. People started throwing this AI ops word around, and there are a lot of companies raising
Yeah, there are.
crap ton of money around, their AI ops stuff. And I never really understood what was real about it. And many times, right, it just sounded like another word for monitoring to me, but whatever, there is no AI in it. But, and now, look, over the last year and a half, 2 years, maybe we've seen observability come up here, and they don't get the difference. Raven, I think you do. Because quite frankly, your black box analogy with electronics in the military, that is, you got to figure out what the unknowns are from the unknowns. It's not just getting all these signals which are known and then recognizing patterns and putting some automation behind it. That's not observability. I'm sorry, right? That not in my mind anyway. So I think number one is we need to clearly define, and Charity, you are a major kind of evangelist for this. What is observability versus AI ops versus ALM, which is before AI ops, right? And so forth. And there are SREs who are living this, and DevOps teams who are living this every single day out here, right? Who haven't got their heads around it. Raven, I always look to you as someone though who gets it. Where do you fit on that? Where do you kind of see it on? Let's say there's a scale of ALM, AI ops, blah blah blah, observability. What do you think?
I feel like I would be most close to observability, and because again, anything with ops in it, when you start doing like DevSecOps and DevOps, like all of those ops, are just become marketing terms after a while, right? But observability is because it's not quite tangible. It's actually more real. Because it's real, because it speaks to exactly what's going on when you're trying to get continuous improvement. Because you need metrics, right, to show and prove that you're doing continuous improvement. But how do you get there? Like, what is it? What are the steps to get you there? How are you alerted that you're not improving or that you are going backwards? And so when I feel, for me, as far as observability, I'm at the cusp, because I didn't actually know that the word existed until I found out about the talk. Like, I didn't know that it had been defined. So it's really cool to know that I can now call it observability. It's because it's that thing that there isn't a tool to actually help me know what it is that I'm looking at all the time. Not all the time, right? There are some tools that help me some of the time, but not all the time. And it's the times that I don't know, that's when we are stuck, because it could be impacting the way my system performance or the team's performance.
Charity, I think you might have a customer there. It sounds like they need a tool.
I think that like one of the key differentiators here between observability and AI ops and stuff is what it tries to center. With observability, like we are not, the AI ops are like, we'll tell you what to look at. You don't need to understand your systems. We'll understand your system for you. We'll tell you what to look at. We'll tell you what it means. We'll tell you what's important. With observability, it's the opposite. I think that we need to look to solutions that let computers do what computers are good at, and let humans do what humans are good at. Computers are good at crunching lots of numbers, but they can't attach meaning to something, right? Only human beings can attach meaning to something. If I see a big old spike of red, that could be good, that could be bad. You don't know. Like, there is no meaning until a human has attached them to it. And with AI ops, like, AI ops only really works with the corpus of data that you're training on. Doesn't change. So if you're actually shipping new software every day, you're fucking up your corpus. Like, this is kind of incompatible with modern software development. I have many thoughts and feelings on AI ops. God bless them. But mostly I think that what they're trying to do is take the humans out of the driver's seat. And I understand why, because, C-levels, CTOs, CIOs, whatever, this is something that kind of blew my mind when I realized it a couple of years ago. they trust vendors over their own people, right? Their employees come and go. Vendors are forever. So whenever a vendor comes along and is like, give me tens of millions of dollars, your people don't have to hold all of the wisdom in their heads. You could replace them. They're fungible. The tool will tell you that tool will be the source of truth. And I just fundamentally reject. I've never seen that work well. I think it's a shitty way to treat your people. And I would prefer to take the approach.
And I would not agree with that statement, quite honestly. I've had leads that aren't like that.
All right. Mr. Vice President, I'm talking. Sorry, go ahead.
And then using our tools to make them better, right? To enhance them, to give them a better sense of like where they sit in time and space and the history and what's happened before and what they should be wearing grooves in the system as they use it and as their team uses it. So I think that it's just that if you're centering the person's observability and if you're centering sorry, go ahead, Kurt.
It's okay, Kurt. Your turn.
In my experience, the leads I've had, I'm a senior director level now. It was the same at Splunk. I did not encounter that where my leads trusted vendors more than myself or the people on my team. That I was surprised to hear that, quite honestly, Charity. I have not experienced that.
That shocked me too. It's not universal, but it's there. It exists quite a lot.
Yeah, that's too bad to hear. That is seriously wrong. And that's going to go against everything we need to accomplish internally.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun attracting great people with that mental model.
Yeah. And the other thing, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, Charity. We have very complicated systems we're running, the source code management, the build systems, the agents. I've found that it always is very helpful to distill it down into discrete parts. Try not to boil the ocean at once. Let's start with the source code management system. How are we observing that? What are we doing here? And would you suggest that's a great way for people to get going? I mean, when you try and look at everything, you have to look at everything for sure. But to get started, it seems like find some of the most important pieces. Source code management is a great one, the crown jewels. What's your suggestion there for getting started? And
source code management is important, but shouldn't almost ever be in the critical production path. Mm-hmm. And when people are rolling something out, I always advise them to find something don't waste your time like instrumenting, adding observability to like some backwater to your system. Like find the thing that you're trying to understand and fix now. Find the thing that's broken. Find the thing that's causing you pain, right? Mm-hmm. Because it should be an order of magnitude better at answering your questions. Observability should be than monitoring. I honestly don't think you could look someone in the eye and ask them to switch up what they're doing and to use something else unless you can tell them it's going to be an order of magnitude better than what they've got now, right? Because the costs of transition are so high. But like with observability, you shouldn't be able to go from, instead of just like these aggregates where it's like, well, I see a spike, but I can't tell what it means or how they're different. With observability, you should be able to go exactly those rows. In which ways are those events different from all of the baseline events? And very quickly go, I have a much richer view of my system now. And once you've got that, you should be able to explain way more about what's going on. So like we see this all the time when people are when they're rolling out Honeycomb, right? They roll it out to a service and they're like, oh God, there are problems there. Did you know that this was broken? Oh, and we're like, yeah, but you're just picking up the rug, right? Like it's been there, it's been that way for as long as right? And they'll pick up another service and problems. I'm like, yeah, but these problems have existed. You just had no idea because we were dealing with time series aggregates, right? So I feel like the way to pick up momentum, the way to incentivize people to like get excited about this is to like look for the biggest pain point in your system and attack that with observability.
That's great advice.
Charity, I question, can observability actually take into account process? Because you're talking about like if there's something wrong in the system itself, but sometimes the thing that's wrong with the system is the process.
It's not about process. And you're totally right. That is not something that you should ever ignore, right? A lot of the biggest problems are process problems, but observability is not the tool for that.
Mm-hmm. And that's good to know too, because quite frankly, and Mitchell knows this too, we live in a silver bullet world where people think the latest shiny trinket is the cure-all.
Everything you should run
You
around.
know, observability, yeah, it's not going to cure COVID either. But
and that was a point I was trying to make initially. I think I said it wrong. It's not that monitoring, reporting, logging are foundational; they're complementary. You kind of need them all.
Yeah.
If you're running modern stacks, I said that incorrectly at the start. It's not foundational. They're so, you need them alongside each other.
They're adjacent. They're not.
Yeah,
they're not.
Absolutely.
It's not a pyramid per se.
Exactly.
I think it's part of your stack. Horizontally.
Yes.
Mitch, we haven't. Go ahead, Kurt, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I found with especially new individuals and new people to the DevOps team and the DevOps world, getting them involved in the monitoring and saying, hey, this is how we start monitoring. That's a great place to start. Like, it's almost entry level for observability, if you will. I'd love your opinion on that, Charity, too.
I really think that everyone who writes and ships software should be on call for their code. Like, no matter how junior software ownership, right?
Yep.
And so yes, that's very empowering. I think when you show them how to find the trail from the alert that's paging them, trace it all the way through the system and fix it. Like, that's something that as engineers, like, we feed on that. It's exciting to get to know how to run your shit better. Yes, absolutely.
Well, but so you know what, Mitchell and I started a company, or two co-founders of a company called Still Secure 20 years ago. And that was one of the things. Mitchell ran the engineering team, and that was one of the things he instituted, I remember, was that every developer had to take a turn on the help support desk, like level 1, answer the phone, hello, Mr. Customer, and try to explain it, because they had to answer the alert. And even when they weren't on that level 1, our escalation procedure was, if it went to level 2 or 3, it was the developer who did the level 2 and 3 support.
Yes, and I do think every engineer should be on call for their work. But you have to couple that with, it's management's job to make sure that doesn't suck, that it isn't life impact, that it doesn't kill you with pages over. It is management's absolute fucking responsibility to make sure that they're given the time to, away from project work, to like fix these problems so that they don't recur, so that they get enough sleep. I think it's reasonable to ask any engineer to be woken up 2 or 3 times a year for their code. That's it. Because more than that, you're burning people out hardcore.
Charity, Raven, I have a question. I have a question I'd love to ask all of you. I'm thinking about, observability has been elevated, right? Because of, in part, the world that we're living in. Software architecture's changing. We're dealing with microservices, all these much smaller things that are interconnected to make software. And at the same time, as we're changing at the pace of which we release software, not only is it unknown unknowns, it's a change. It's like a river, or in the river of the changing software, right? So you're trying to understand all of those things at the same time. It seems like it's the right time for observability to be the thing to be working on, because ops has to be elevated to the same level of the same kind of architecture and processes that we're using across the into the life cycle of software. You agree with that or not? It seems to me we're at the right place right now.
I feel like the first wave of DevOps transformation was all about ops people, learn to write code. We're all like, okay. But I feel like the pendulum has swung. I think now it's about, okay, software engineers, your turn.
You got to do ops.
To learn to write operable services and to learn to maintain them and be on call for them. And because what microservices has done, like all of that complexity and logic used to be bundled up in the app, right? The app. And now it's like been thrown to the four directions of the map. And what that means is that so much of like understanding and operating your application has been pushed into the realm of operations and systems, right? It used to be that if all else failed, you could attach a debugger to your app and just step through it, see what was happening, right? Well, you can't do that anymore now because the process died and jumped to another service and another service. And part of like the way that we instrument for observability is all about packing up the context of the application and shipping it along with it from hop to hop, one event per request per service, so that you can slice and dice and reason about your systems in the way that you used to be able to.
Doing that really changes the design. I'm thinking Alan's story about what I did back at Still Secure. What prompted that was when a customer called in and said, I'm sitting in and we're using your product, and this dialog box popped up and it says an unknown error occurred. And that's all it says. Like, what do I do? Well, nobody knows what to do with that. So we all decided, look, everybody does support in that case, right? Everybody does ops. And that changed. Okay, all right, we have to figure this out. And suddenly that was the problem of how do we make this easier to support and easier to resolve issues with. So it does affect behavior and design a product.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think microservices will actually do good for observability, because if you do microservices correctly, right, then each service is atomic. It does one thing and one thing only, and it does that thing good, right? So if the unknown is now taken out of it because you know exactly what it's supposed to do.
Out of it.
In my ideal world, it is. There are no more unknowns.
Yeah.
In Raven's world, exactly.
Yeah. But I'm going to tell you something. The flip side to this, though, too, with microservices, and I think we're starting to see this now, is can you have too many microservices running? Is the complexity load in there such that observability almost becomes meaningless or impossible?
I don't know that complexity could ever really be created. No, observability is not meaningless. It's your only hope to understand the shit if that's what you've done to yourself. But like complexity can only be moved around, right? It's just a question of trade-offs, like which set of trade-offs. Some people have gone whole hog on microservices, and then they found the edges to those design patterns, But
I was going to say, what I find challenging is both at Splunk. Autodesk was interesting. So to your point, Alan, we used to make engineers buy bagels. You break things, you have to buy bagels. And so we had a lot of bagels brought in. But both at Splunk and here at Tricentis, we have a world where we're supporting large enterprise applications and delivery of enterprise apps. We're also obviously all the microservices, and trying to apply these techniques across the board is very interesting, very challenging.
Oh yeah, there's no one size fits all.
There's not. And almost to the point you made, Raven, observability almost has to be customized for what you're observing. I haven't had a chance to run Honeycomb yet, but for me, my experience has been there's always those little idiosyncrasies about how we run our apps, how we deliver our software.
Auto instrumentation. No one else can do it for you, right? Yeah. It could get you started, it could give you a boost, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to fucking understand your software and roll that into your instrumentation. Right. Nobody else can do that for you, let alone machines.
And that's where with AI ops, I won't say it's complete shit. I think there is some value there. Some of it is just about automating common occurrences, and maybe that's not valuable,
But the value of an AI ops isn't AI, but they're just using that to raise like lots of VC money.
Oh, sure, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then we're completely agreed. Like, I have an AI too.
No, but and you're right. AI is a money term, but ML ops is something that's caught on a bit, right? More than I think than AI ops, and I think that's really what's the heart of it, which was to recognize repeatable patterns or recognize patterns.
Although I would still challenge. I think in far too many cases, people are reaching for the complicated solution instead of fixing it at the start. Like they're like, oh, I've got like 50 gazillion emails, and all of that disk space, so I need AI to solve it. Instead of turning off the fucking emails and setting up a different kind of alert or some like automatic failover, it's just like, is this really a problem we need to solve, or could we solve it better by just not having it?
There is that, right? Do we need to solve and I think Charity, you were getting at it before. Do we need to solve every problem?
Is it the most important problem? Is this going to be the biggest bang for our buck?
Yep. I mean, we used to have it.
Red diffs are the best diffs. Like senior engineers write software, but very senior engineers delete software.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, when Mitchell and I were doing the security company, we had a product, Vulnerability Assessment and Management, VAM. Internally, we called it the bad news generator because that's what it was. It was the bad news generator. And the problem was, we would go to an organization like Ravens and it would pop up, a few thousand vulnerabilities. And the security or the ops people would be like, what am I going to do? And don't worry about 95% of them. Let's just worry about the top 5%, right? And it was like it was employment insurance. It was because there would always be more vulnerabilities for us to find next year. But that being said, it really was a case where you're not going to fix everything. We don't have the time to fix everything, even if we wanted to.
It's not really doing a great job of giving you differentiation, letting you know what's really important and what's just noise, right? So much of the tools, they just give you so much noise, and it's almost worse than nothing at all.
Well, that's why it was the bad news generator. People used to, so Mitchell got the lucky part of designing it. I had to go sell it. Right? That was much harder.
I remember the guy from the federal government called and said, this thing is spamming everybody in the defense
with all these vulnerabilities.
How do I turn it off?
Because we had this automated workflow before we had cool terms like AI and ML. But it is hard. Guys, we're coming down the home stretch here. We probably only have 5 minutes or so left. I wanted to, let's look forward now, right? I'm big into looking forward these days. I'm hoping we're going to do conferences in person again. We're going to, I don't know if we'll go back to our offices, but what's next for observability? How does this continue to evolve?
What's next is, I think, really wrapping traces in as a first-class tool. So that right now, too many people are like, buy one tool for metrics, one tool for logs, one tool for observability, another tool for trade. They're spending to store their data again at every time. And it's worse than that because you can't actually seamlessly break down and chain events. So you're just copy pasting this ID into that tool or hoping that this spike, because it seems to line up time-wise, is actually these in the logs. You should be paying to store this data once, and you should be able to flip back and forth between modes, right? Are you slicing and dicing? Are you doing aggregations at read time? Are you zooming in? Are you zooming out? Or are you flipping back so you can view it as a waterfall, by time? I think that observability tools like us and Lightstep, which are the only two observability tools out there by my technical definition. Although I will say, I do think that this might be the year that begins to change. I know that so many of the big players have been working as fast as they can for years on the back end. They're trying to catch up to where we sit technically faster than we can catch up to where they sit in terms of business. So.
And I like that you said that. I'm sorry, Kurt. I just wanted to say
No, Raven, go ahead.
About tracing, because that's actually the solution that I am actually looking for. That I've been looking for.
It's got a lot of rough
organizations.
Edges.
Yes,
but there are lots
to
of
be able to follow
any other way.
Exactly. So I feel good that I'm doing it inherently. I know what I'm supposed to be doing, and I've actually found a way to do that. But yeah, tracing I also think is the way to go. That is the only way you're going to be able to know. Because it's taking you from point A to point B to point C to point D, and you'll be able to see that all. And there will be no unknowns.
Oh, honey, you keep saying that.
Let me live my dream. Let me live my little dream.
Kurt, what do you got?
Yeah, well, where my mind goes to in the future is, what are we doing in the education system to really disseminate this information, how modern software is developed, how we monitor it. And then also observability is such a loaded term because I know at Splunk, they would consider observability something much different for, running, a SOC and things like that. So I think I mean, at its core, observability is what it is, but how it's implemented for different disciplines and how they use it, I think companies would definitely take exceptions with some of the things we've said here and what observability means to them, and I would just say, keep that in mind that it is a huge field. And I think we're going to see further improvements. I love the tracing, and being able to have that in your tool set would be fantastic.
Charity, final thoughts before we wrap?
Oh, I am just enjoying the fact that so many people are so interested in this that they'll show up and argue about it all the time. So
it's all good. Hey, you know what? It's a living. Mitchell, as usual, I'm going to give you the last word.
Well, I've learned two things today. Don't call my tool an observability tool or an AI tool unless it really meets the definition. I'm going to get crucified. No, no. What? I mean, I love this conversation. I learned a ton. I always do when we have these. What's so cool to me is that we're talking about operations and we're talking about, this part of our world, and we're not talking about better ticketing systems. We're talking about really meaty, interesting things that help us do our jobs better, do a better job for the company, for the customer. That's exciting to me. It's just really cool. I enjoy it very much.
Mm-hmm. Join us for our next show where we'll be talking about better ticketing systems. No, we won't.
No. And what argument did I miss? No.
It's all good. You know what? I enjoy having really bright, smart people who are willing to, express their opinions. And when I knew we had this panel was the lineup, I knew there was going to be no shortage of opinions, nor backing down.
We're going to call the next one the observability mix up.
Right.
We're going to have to call it like observability AI.
I still want to see that.
AI observability.
We need to see the sticker Charity was holding up. We need to see that.
Oh, yeah.
We never got to that. Yes.
We have to see that.
I've got release is not deployed.
You got a lot of them here.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I love that.
Right.
Deploy on Fridays.
You know what? You used to be able to get these things at conferences. Now we're used to showing them on Zoom.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, perhaps this is a good day to deploy.
Maybe.
Okay, yeah, perhaps.
It's Friday. It's not a good day.
That Friday's
That's the one. Right
and there it is. I deploy from CROD.
That's the one to end on right there.
Yeah. That's it.
Beautiful.
We're going to wrap it. Hey, you've watched DevOps Unbound. It's sponsored by Tricentis. Many thanks to them for sponsoring. Just wanted to quickly mention Kurt is from Tricentis. Charity is from Honeycomb, and it's honeycomb.io. Go check them out.
Free tier.
And a very generous free trip. Raven, you can start playing with it now and see if it's something that gives you tracing and so forth. Mitchell, thanks for joining us. We'll be back. Actually, we are back with a roundtable next, which will be open to the public. Looking forward to having you on for that. But until then, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps Unbound. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you soon.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right, next up is our part 2 of 3 parts in the Haunted Hacker podcast. This one's, as always, hosted by Mike Jones. He is talking with David Lee, who is AKA DC Cybersec, talking about InfoSec, cybersecurity, and all that good stuff. Let's give it a listen.
Yeah, that's sort of to answer that question. But to talk about owning a business and doing that instead of working for someone else, the main reason for me was, like I said earlier, working in the same job for longer periods of time is, for me, quite tricky. But to have a business that's going to be successful, you do need to have that base knowledge as well. So it's sort of a chicken and egg type situation where it would be great to start a business when you're 16, 17 in cybersecurity as a pen tester, but being able to sell yourself is going to be tricky because you don't have too much credentials to promote yourself. So I've written up a one-page bio thing that I give to my clients if they ask me. And it basically says, have a look at my YouTube channel. This is what I'm talking about. If you want to look how I talk or how I discuss things, these are my list of certifications and the sort of environments that I've done work for before. And that's it. I don't care about like, where did you work before? Because that's just a name drop and it means nothing to anyone important, only HR. And I have so many rant videos about how much I hate HR. Some of them I had to make private because they're just too much for YouTube anyway. But yeah, HR just grinds my gears, man. I hate them. I really hate them.
Yeah, the level of resumes I get from HR when I worked for my previous company was ridiculous. Like people who couldn't spell CISSP, people who didn't know what a SOC was. And if they found somebody, like some random person with CEH, hired, like, oh, let's this guy's golden. 10 minutes in an interview room with him, and it was like a nightmare. It was like really like the industry in the U.S. has gotten so diluted, right? So when I first got into pen testing, we didn't have the I guess the label of CEH or even pen testing. There was no pen testing industry when I got involved. When we started, it was basically, we know how to break your shit, hire us, we'll help you. But now there's like certifications and there's a whole like schooling around how to get these guys thinking, like an attacker and trying to sell this mentality or whatever. But it's falling really, really short. So I've looked at some of the courses and some of the things they put together, and it's bad. It's really, really bad. They teach you academic book shell code. They teach you how to look at a network from a very IT perspective. But when it comes to looking at it from an attacker, there's none of that even exists. And I feel like as an industry, we're tearing ourselves apart because, you get cops out there who are trained to do riot control, to do traffic stops, or whatever. And they've been taught that out of a book. Where police departments, where law enforcement fails is when people who don't grasp those concepts 100% take those concepts to the streets and actually perform them. Right. So we have pen testers who go out there with this very little knowledge of actual pen testing. Hey, I'm a CEH. I got hired by HR. I'm good to go. And then they fuck up an entire corporation pen test and do a denial of service or lock people out of their accounts. And I think that's the dilution is really sad. Because when we first started in this industry, it was really pure and there was a lot of like really good talent. But I think as far as certifications go, this is my platform, right? And I hate to bitch about this, but my platform is certification as an industry is a complete failure. People are getting paid to do these boot camps. And then there's a test at the end saying, hey, I know this information, but really it's shotgunning for a test. And I did that through high school and barely graduated high school. Do I remember high school? No, not really. But I passed the test. So does that make me a graduate? Not really sure. But same thing with CEH. So what's your opinion on certification, knowledge in the industry, and what should be required before someone's actually able to go off and do manual pen tests?
I don't have too much experience in pen testing, but I can talk about SOC environments if that's cool.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Okay, so certifications, when I was working as a SOC team lead, I was in the recruitment process for expanding that team. And there was a constant, this is where my hate for HR came in mostly, but there was a constant fight between certification versus experience. Right. And what I was looking for was someone who could work in a team and someone who so basically someone who's not an asshole. And what sort of experience they had rather than what certifications. So if they were presenting things like, I had this side project where I built a whole bunch of Raspberry Pis into a botnet, and so I'd be like, this guy, I like him. But then they're looking for, but do they have a CEH, which I threw out so many times that it's the most load of shit certification I've ever seen. The only reason I got one is because I was paid to do it. I had to do it for that organization. I didn't want to do it, but I've got it. So yay for me. But it's there was a constant battle there between certification versus experience. And I was always looking for experience, either professionally or project. And HR was always looking for what certs do they have that they can bring to the table. And I think that's I don't know if that's like a very government type of approach. I think it probably is, because I've seen less of that in private organizations, especially in smaller teams. Like these government organizations they're not small. They had SOC teams of like 100 plus. They're not small at all. So it's, I think they were HR was looking for certifications. I was looking for experience and personality.
Right. And that's key, right? So I built, I don't know how many SOCs, and my last corporate position was a SOC director. And the way that I looked at potential candidates was not based on, have you had experience with Splunk, or can you do ArcSight, or can you do Darktrace? It was more of, here's an attack. How would you go about analyzing this attack? Where did this attack come from? How is it generated? Show me how it's produced. And 90% of the CEHs were just lost. OSCP, they could grasp like the attack part of it, but when it came into mitigation, it was a different story. So I really preach like knowing both sides of the equation, right? So be the attacker, right? Go out and learn how to break shit. But then if you really want a job at Blue Team or SOC, you better know how to defend against it as well. And Blue Team is not my thing, but building a SOC was, because I could build it from both sides. One thing that really bothered me was the bureaucracy and the red tape when it came to SOC, right? So we had multiple clients in this one SOC that relied on our monitoring, et cetera. But it just seemed like a complete Groundhog Day of exercises of child porn and acceptable use, like violations. And that's not what I was hired for, right? So, it's important to be able to identify that stuff, but in the long run, that stuff causes a lot of damage, a lot of financial loss, could shut down networks. But there's people above that, right? So let's take a look at where those child porn websites come from. Why are they accessible from our network? Why are people able to access them from offshore platforms or whatever? And tell me what executive made this okay on those platforms, and we can address it, right? And certifications don't tell you that. Certifications tell you, hey, in order to hack this website, use Donald Dick. And when I took the CH course and was going through their classroom fucking syllabus and saw Donald Dick, I was like, you've got to be kidding me, right? You want me to audit this course and tell you what's wrong, and you're using a tool from 1990. Like, no, that's our industry is way beyond that. But that's what we deal with, right?
There's different layers of like threat protection and URL filtering as well. It doesn't just sit with let's block the IP type thing. There's so many different layers to that.
I mean, when you look at the type of protection that you can have available as opposed to what's being utilized in 90% of the market, it's sad. And when you look at the breaches and see SolarWinds was attacked, effectively, and you look at all of the other places that were attacked, you're like, it's no surprise. But for the government here in the US, it was a complete surprise. And I'm like, where have you been the past 10 years? Have you been living under a rock? Like, this shit has been building. Like, it's here. It's time. And I think globally during the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, I really think people should have taken a step back and realized that, guess what? The internet is about to be fucked completely. Cybercrime.
And it did.
Yes.
Multiple times.
Bandwidth, you look at the attack structure, you look at nation state, the internet blew up after COVID.
The internet jumped into the bang bus. That's essentially what happened. Yeah.
No better comment for that. I mean, that's completely. So when you look at what's going on now and people trying to like catch up and the vaccination and people trying to steal like information about the vaccination, it's an info war right across the internet. And unfortunately, US, UK, everybody's is failing at that because that's not our primary mode of, I guess, puffing our chest. Ours is more kinetic, let's show you bombs, let's show you missiles while you completely destroy our infrastructure with the internet. And that's going to go on for a while, right? In the economy, anytime the global economy is bad from pandemic, people have to make money. And whether it's through your network or your consumers, we're going to find a way to make money.
Yeah. And this is kind of goes back to that mafia point of view that you were saying before, which is that the frontier of crime is no longer in the streets with guns. Nope. It's on the internet with information. And it has been for a while. It's just now in the last year, with the pandemic and everything blowing up, that is where you get attacked. Yeah. And the proof is there. Look at the phishing stats.
200% within the first month. 200%.
Exactly, yeah. And it grew from there. Like it didn't stop at 200. It didn't sort of flatline at 200. It kept going, and it will continue to keep going for a very long time. And when people start realizing that that's how you're going to need to start protecting your environments, that's when things will happen. But saying that, I have had a lot of companies asking me for pen tests, but including phishing in there.
Yeah.
And not only that, but also in there where their data center is or whatever, to do a physical pen test on those environments as well, because there's less people guarding it, because there's less people around, basically, like physical people there. So they are looking at the security of that. And if, maybe there's some guy in a van out the front, who knows? So there has been an increase in that as well. But I'd say phishing has been the number one thing this year for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done pen tests for domain registrars for different companies, but if you need help, if you get a pen test for, like a legit, like regular pen test, let me know.
We usually sign people up on quarterly pen tests.
Yeah.
We do one big one at the start and say, this is what's wrong and this is how long it's going to take for us to protect it. If you want us to, otherwise you can get your own team to do it. But usually they're just like, just do it.
Yeah, so we focused, I guess, the past year on post-pandemic struggles within IT, and have identified several like key processes that have failed in all corporations. A lot of that has to do with hiding data, right? So CEOs posting too much data on their public profiles, social media, et cetera. There's a lot out there because everybody's lives revolve around the internet now. As before, you look at Facebook, take for example, right? And you got people who you knew in high school or secondary school, and they live their lives on social media. Well, when the pandemic hit, you had corporations, executives who didn't live their lives on the internet and social media who are now doing it, and which causes like physical vulnerability to that executive, to their family, to financial vulnerability to bank accounts, to transactions, to SWIFT, to chips, all the above. And every talk I've given between, I guess it was a year ago and today, has all been working from home. And the predictions I made last year was we're going to see more ICS SCADA attacks, as well as, some serious like financial hits on executives, like targeted executives.
If I see someone in an organization on LinkedIn who's like the account manager or accounts executive or whatever, someone in accounts, they're my number one target.
Absolutely.
I'm going to hit them hard, and I'm going to be calling them up as Ben from Microsoft to sign into OneDrive or whatever, anything I can think of that I think they're going to fall for. Mm-hmm. It's not that hard. You find them on Facebook or Instagram, do a bit of digging, see if they've got a leaked password somewhere on some sort of breach database, and see if it's still the same. Chances are it probably is, or a very close to a derivative of that original password. They just changed the number or whatever.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So I got
hacking, right?
Yeah,
very loosely. Yeah.
Open source hacking. So I got interviewed by a CISO. I guess it was about 3 or 4 months ago, and the guy did no homework on me. Didn't know who I was. Didn't know, anything about my background. But I did a full OSINT dossier on him through Facebook. I knew who his kids were, his daughters. I knew where they went to school. I knew what college football team he played for. I knew the Marine Corps platoon he was in, like everything. And when we had a conversation, it was like I knew him for 20 years. And this guy was like, "How do you know so much?" And I was like, "Because I do my homework. I'm interested in this job."
The internet.
Yes, I'm interested in this job, and it would make common sense to me if you were interested in hiring somebody for this job.
The right sort of intent to use that information for something not so nice, like maybe I'll kidnap your kids and see what money I can get.
Exactly, Rance.
I mean, that might sound extreme, but it happens.
It happens. It happens daily, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
I was working for a intelligence company in Dallas, and part of our portfolio was identifying people who had taken kids for ransom from executives and finding a way to get them back through teams on the ground as well as intel. So it happens. It's not what you see in the movies. What people don't understand is life imitates art and art imitates life. So what you see in the movies, to a variation, to a degree, happens in real life. And what you see happening in real life happens in the movies. I mean, it's vice versa, right? My life has not been a Disney feature film for, Disney ice capades on ice, but it's been more like a nightmare. ETA Ghost can equate to that, and some other people I know that have gone through similar serious situations that life imitates art and art imitates life. But as an industry, we want the mystique. We want the people that were involved in these psychological thrillers, but we don't want the responsibility of having them as a threat to our company. So they pull us in as assets and use us where they want and then burn us, and that's it. And that's another thing that's going to do a disservice to the industry, right? So there's a lot of us who have backgrounds who we probably wouldn't qualify for security clearance anymore. But we know a lot more than maybe Lockheed Martin or Pro Systems or any company that creates malware. But they're fearful, right? They won't pull us in unless there's like a serious nation state breach. And by then it's too late. It's really too late.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it with SolarWinds, right? If they would have hired some of us to come in and say, "Hey, look, your shit's fucked, and this is how," they probably could have deterred away from that situation.
I dare say someone did tell them. Yeah. I'm sure there was someone skilled enough in there saying, "Your shit's fucked and you need someone to fix it." And they were like, low priority. We're more focused about making money and pushing sales.
Yeah.
Let's focus on that, and we'll cover the security later. And I only say that because that's usually what happens in a massive corporate environment like SolarWinds.
100% truth, right? So even without SolarWinds, right? So the critical infrastructure, the power grid, the water supply is all being engineered off NT systems, like really archaic shit.
Yep, and gas lines as well.
Yeah, and nobody wants to protect them because it would take a huge undertaking plus financial burden to fix it. But in the meantime, they're calling me saying, "Hey, can we get a comment about how the water system in Florida was compromised?" And I'm like, "Well, how long of a statement do I need to make?" Because it's really easy. It's like a 10-second statement. The shit is fucked because you don't care and you don't want to put money towards it. Period.
It's not a priority because it costs money.
There's no ROI.
And it's not cheap either.
Yeah, there's no ROI. And that's been my biggest platform for probably about the past 20 years is that, companies and corporations want to spend money on cybersecurity, but the board of investors, there's no ROI. They don't see the return on investment. They see this quarter we weren't compromised. But the real value comes when they are compromised and they're like, oh, well, shit, it only took us like a day to get back up. We only lost like, $1 million, right? That's a big win for most big corporations. But if they don't invest in cybersecurity, that $1 million becomes like 50 million. And that 1 week becomes like a year. So, I mean, that's where we're heading as a culture, as civilization right now.
I have seen some changes here in Australia where if you do have a data breach, you do have to report it and you can get fined by the government for not having a secure environment. So there is an initiative there to push these companies into securing their environments, I think that's a good direction to take. And I have an example of this the other day. I think it was Monday morning. It's like 5 a.m. or something. And a guy who I had organized to do a pen test for starting Thursday called me up and he said, we've had a data breach. I was like, well, at least you made the call, because he made the call last year to have this pen test done. And it is a government organization, so it takes a while to get these things approved.
Right.
And it went through all the approval. It was scheduled for Thursday, all good. Monday morning comes around, we've been breached. I need you to help. Step in right now and get this stuff done. I'm like, bro, I can't just like drop everything. Well, I've got other people to look after here. So anyway, I helped out as much as I could and did some forensic work on following the breadcrumbs and all the rest of it. But it's just that, because his main concern was they needed to contain the breach to keep under the threshold for being fined, because the fine is hefty. It's not a small, it's lots of money. So
yeah, in the US, they're more willing to pay the fine than they are to put together the defense mechanism, which is really sad. I mean, because really the people who pay the ultimate price are the consumers.
Yep.
But in the US, and
also your name, if you worked for that organization in the SOC and you go to another job and they say, oh, wait, weren't you part of that data breach not long ago? And you're like,
no.
I mean, come on, we were doing what we could. Yeah, we had our hands tied, man. So yeah, that happens as well.
Yeah, I've been in that position before where I had a company that had gotten breached through the accounts payable. I put together a complete report showing how they were forwarding emails out to a third party and people were interjecting themselves in the email strings. And their reaction was, if the board hears about this, we'll lose our jobs. So I'm not reporting it. And I was like, look, you have my report. It's in your hands. If you decide not to report it, that's not me. So, I mean, there's a lot of CYA that shouldn't go on that goes on, especially in the US. So with that being said, Will and Ghost, do you have any questions for David?
There's a couple in the chat. Pen testing versus red team engagements. What's your preference and why? If you've ever done red teaming, SOC analyst versus pen testing. I need to be looking for passion and bringing ideas to life. I like the comment about passion. I definitely look at passion. That's what I was talking about with personality, is that person with the right frame of mind to get into a job. But pen testing versus red team, the only pen testing I've ever done is in my current contract that I'm doing as a cloud network pen tester, which is a little bit different to your normal pen test. It's not like web app pen testing. It's more like you have a look at a Meraki or a Unify or something like one of those cloud network technologies and try and find the vulnerabilities in that. The other type of pen testing that I do is in Azure environments primarily. So on that cloud thing as well, trying to harden Azure. So versus red team, which I love doing, but there's not that much around of it, especially at the moment with all the lockdown and stuff. It's become less of a priority compared to different types of cloud technologies that more and more people are using. So red team is fun. It's pretty rare, but it is good. So back when I was working in that government organization, my main role was in like a social engineering red team role, and it was a 12-month contract again. And it was fun. And you get to do lots of like, FBI open up type stuff, except not quite as Hollywood as that, but especially in a technical role. But it was fun. So I guess fun versus tech. It's somewhere in between, which is good for me anyway. There are people like specialists who they specialize in breaking into places, like picking locks and stuff, all that good stuff. You're more in a red team technical position. You're more designing those tools for those guys to use. You don't really go out into the wild type thing, or sometimes you do, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, for red team, I think it's more of, especially like the physical test, right? So it's more of I consider it a jump crew. So in the military, we had crews that were ready to roll on 24-hour notice, and those were our jump crews. And with red teaming, same thing, right? So you have your electronic locks, you have physical locks, you have your kits, you have your RFID. It's really the same assessment over and over again, but that's our jump team. With what you're doing is more like, ad hoc red team, where you bring in a red team to test certain technology and move on. Yeah. But yeah, with military red team, it's way different than what most people see in corporate.
Yep.
And
they separate it out a lot as well. So I was more on a surveillance side of things. So if that's where the social engineering bit comes in, where you do have to talk to people to get information to give to the rest of the surveillance team to work out how to move from there, and then someone else does the actual moving. Like you're in a computer room, like you're not out there. So there's different areas of it as well.
So me and my roommate went to a place called, what was it? Unclaimed baggage, I believe. So they took suitcases from the airlines that weren't claimed and dumped all of the shit that you can buy out of those suitcases. And dude, we found antennas, we found Kindles, we found all kinds of really cool shit. And I'm thinking, wow, I could supply my whole red team kit, my go bag, through one of these places. USB, power packs and antennas, it takes that for red team, right? So pen testing is a little different. Pen testing is more of, let me sit on the outside, mimic, a hacker who may be looking at your network as a potential target. And then look at, as far as red team goes, we look at physical, we look at people, we look at placement, we look at process, we look at all the above, cameras, IP, etc. And then we find our way in through that way. But even with that being said, there's less and less of that being done right now because of pandemic. People think, we're in a pandemic. We don't need a red team assessment because streets are closed down. Well, if I live within a block of your facility, I'm probably already in your network and probably don't need a red team assessment. But if you're a company listening to the podcast right now and you have if you're a medium business, you can't afford not to get a red team assessment during the pandemic because the threatscape has changed, the attack methodology has changed, the tools that we use have changed. It's not the same red team assessment you got a year ago. So maybe take a look at that. Wayne had a message. Hi, David. When it comes to talent, raw skill, are you finding people's ambition is getting a little ahead of their real skill, i.e. their perception? Actual skills are quite different. I'm curious if this is a part of your current problem. I mean, it's respectively. So I'll let you answer this, David, and then I'll answer it as well because I have my own take on it.
The short answer is yes, ambition is definitely outweighing the level of skill. But saying that, that's not so much a bad thing. That's where I feel people are just hungry for the job. And I don't think ambition is a bad thing at all. In fact, I think it's a great thing. But sometimes you do need to get in check. And sometimes those interviews that you go to, depending on who you're talking to, like once you get past HR and they're rubbish, and you talk to someone technical, they'll lay it down on you how much skill you really have. And usually in an interview, they'll say, look, I'm sorry, you're too green. You're not suited for this thing. But sometimes they say, oh, look, you might be better suited for this. Or maybe with if you focus on these sort of projects that you've been looking at a little bit more, you think they're great, and they are, but put a bit more detail into it and we'll give you the job, something like that. So it kind of goes hand in hand with good and bad, where ambition can outweigh your skill, but I don't think it's a bad thing overall. I think ambition is great. I look at it as something really positive.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, next up, we have our Something Old segment. This is with Matt Newfield, who is talking about cyber trust. Hindsight is 2020. Less of a prediction and more of a just a realization, if you will, that a lot of the things that we were dealing with in 2020 as a result of the pandemic and other things, just the march of technology, if you will, is not going away in 2021. And if anything, we need to be more vigilant this year than we were last year. A lot of the same cybersecurity issues are still going to be around in 2021 that we were dealing with in 2020. So great conversation. Let's give it a listen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Newfield. I'm the Chief Security Infrastructure Officer here at Unisys Corporation, with responsibility for not only our security and security operations, but all of our IT functions. And I really appreciate you taking the time today to have a conversation with me. Let me start by saying Happy New Year and welcome to 2021. On New Year's Eve, there was a great anticipation around the world for what was going to come in 2021 and putting 2020 behind us. For those of us in cybersecurity, that was even a more needed change because of all of the events that occurred at the end of 2020. When you really start looking about how the year culminated, there's a lot we'll talk about in the short period we have today around the human side, what's happened around the world in the pandemic. And it really ended for us on a note of cybersecurity, of everything we heard about SolarWinds and Microsoft. As I reflect on 2020, I can't help but agree with everybody that it was a challenging year. It was a challenging year for a lot of people for a lot of reasons, which made it a challenging year for corporations. It made it a challenging year for families. It made it a challenging year for people's health. And it made it a challenging year for people's finances. And I want to be clear for that because a lot of people hear individuals like myself speak. They hear the cyber or the IT side, or they hear corporations. And I believe people miss that we understand the human side of things. If you've ever heard me speak before, I talk about the human side of the world. And that is a key area that we have to make sure we remember. The widespread pandemic caused so much stress on our society, our economy, and our people that it cannot be underplayed. Humans are social. We like to gather. We like to gather with our friends. We like to gather with our families and our coworkers. And we make a lot of really great decisions because of those gatherings. For those of you in technology, some of the best decisions we make, some of the most innovative ideas we make were near the water fountain, or around a lunch table, or in a cubicle, or an office, a data center, et cetera. And we did not get that opportunity. 2020 disrupted the way we live, the way we work, and it really fueled some key emotions that I think it's important that we as leaders and we as individual contributors really understand. Fear, uncertainty, doubt, anxiety, fatigue, and loneliness are key areas that people felt. They are key emotions and key things that people really had to deal with. But what I find very interesting in our organization and around the world as I talk to my peers and my cohorts in the cyber field, people actually responded and overwhelmingly responded well. They stayed at home, they did social distancing, and we saw some significant improvements in community outreach and support. It was evident that in the light of the pandemic, the number one priority was and continued to be to keep people safe and healthy and to make sure the companies we worked for were secure. Could we have predicted that this would happen? Perhaps. For over a decade, epidemiologists have sounded the warning that a once in a lifetime or a once in 100-year pandemic could ravage our planet, and that even the most advanced nations were ill prepared for the fallout. We talk about this, Fortune magazine wrote about this, and it really was something that I don't think we could have done a ton about, but we could have been prepared. The amount of work we all had to do was amazing, but our chairman said something to me recently that I thought was very important to say. We talk about hindsight being 2020, and even the key part of this presentation is hindsight is 2020, but you need to understand we're saying that with a bit of jest. Hindsight is 2020 is not actually always true. The reason hindsight can be 2020 is because decisions were made and things changed, and looking behind us, it's very easy to say, wow, if I had done something different, these good things or bad things wouldn't have happened, and that's not always the case. And with that, here is hindsight is 2020. Again, there is a ability here to have some jest with this statement, but I do think it's important. I think what you need to do is look behind and leverage the learnings for 2020 as you really get into 2021. You need to ask yourself very specific questions, and you need to be honest with yourself. What worked? What didn't work? And what would you do differently to be prepared next time? You can't always have every answer, but you need to make sure you're really thinking through this. I talk to way too many CIOs and way too many CISOs around the world who sit and go, well, a company's still here. I don't think we're in the news. So everything we did is fine. I don't need to do anything else. And I think that is a huge mistake. Q1 of 2021 should be your time of reflection. If you are that key leader in your organization, I implore you to take the time to really start thinking about it. If you work in an organization for a key leader, I implore you to start asking those individuals, those key leaders, to really step back and think through some specific questions. What did you and your team do to effectively manage and respond to the crisis? That should be your start and your stop. Were you able to get your employees home? Are they secure? Did you improve your monitoring? These are things that are very, very important. And a lot of people I talk to sit back and go, well, again, we think we did. I haven't heard different, so therefore we must be in good shape. Even with the activities that occurred at the end of Q4, where you saw all of the news and all of the press, and I don't even want to get into details. I know there are other presentations about that particular topic. Too many CIOs and too many CISOs around the world looked at that and went, well, I think we're okay, therefore I'm not going to do anything. And the way I view the world is, if you have vendors, third parties, if you have other organizations that do services for you, you must assume the worst. You must assume the worst and act on that. And that should be the foundation of your programs. Another thing I preach when I'm talking about hindsight, and I preach this a lot, is assume the breach, assume the penetration, and focus on the remediation and focus on the response. And if you change your mindset, I promise you, you will be in a much better situation. So what priorities should people have as they're moving into 2021? There are, in my opinion, 6 or 7 things that I think are key for anybody in cybersecurity to really focus on this year. First and foremost, because of what happened at the end of last year, is supply chain risk. We all have it. We all talk about it. You hear the concept of TPRM or third-party risk management, but it's always shuffled off to another group. It's always low in the priority stack when I talk to people around the world, and it needs to move to the top of your list. Other people's risks are now your risks. And what everybody should learn about what happened in 2020 with the specific situation we're talking about is that we're all susceptible. If you have any connectivity from those other organizations, you are using a cloud service, you must assume that bad things happen. That's just the way it is. You need to focus on ransomware. Ransomware will continue to evolve, and it will continue to be a very profitable way for adversaries to make money. The problem I have with ransomware is there are no technical capabilities, in my opinion, that get you 100% where you need to be. There is an education. There is a human side to ransomware that you need to work on in your organizations through training, through, again, other education programs, as well as the technology. Business email compromise is another very large area that people need to focus on. Most organizations have moved their email to third-party platforms. They're sitting in the cloud, and it's very rare for me to hear about people who have internal email with internal email controls. So making sure that you understand business email compromise, again, in the wake of what just happened, needs to be a key priority. Insider threats is another one. Even in 2020, I'm shocked how many executives are offended when we have conversations saying things like, the biggest threat you have are your own employees, not because they're malicious, but because they're human beings. People like to click links. Let's just take it at their base. People like to click links. They like to respond to emails. They like to react quickly. It is not uncommon to hear about employees who went and bought Best Buy gift cards. They clicked that link and entered their credentials into a website that obviously was not your own corporation because either they were rushed or felt a need to succeed. And we need to make sure that we understand it and have programs around it. I believe 5G is going to have major impacts to both the CIO and the CISO functions in 2021 and beyond. As we start moving down that path, the classic way that we do routing, the classic way that we're able to control the flow of data from assets from IoT devices is massively going to change. And while you may not need to do anything today, if you're not thinking about it, if you're not studying it, you're not prepared, you will, I promise you, have problems. In order for these corporations to remain competitive, you have to continue to focus and consider emerging technologies. And that's another big area. There's a lot of things coming out that are very important. And with that said, you must make sure that you're working with your security teams to evaluate the risk and the exposure. However, one thing that has changed is the convergence of work and life. Most of us are not going back into an office. I hear companies talk 40% work from home as a standard. I've heard as high as 80% work from home. So we have to change how we operate. We have to change the tools we provide our employees, and we have to think differently. One of the areas that continues to scare me, and we will go to the next slide real quick, that continues to scare me about work from home, especially in my role, is we have taken all of our employees, and this is not my company, this is a global statement, and you've moved them from generally secure environments into what I consider to be the most hostile networks on the planet, and that's people's homes. Let's be honest. How many people do you talk to that are not in technology know how to patch their television, have ever patched their routers, keep up to date on their tablet devices, their personal laptops, their personal desktops, or any of the IoT devices in their homes? Think cameras, think assistants, think door locks, think garage door openers, think light switches, think light bulbs, and know what they're doing in those environments. How many people have wireless networks in their home that may live in a condo or an apartment complex or close to a neighbor that did not secure their wireless, that their neighbor may be attached to, that an adversary may be attached to? And you're putting a laptop that has corporate data and a connection back into your corporation in that environment. If you think a local firewall, if you think those kinds of things are enough to protect it, I personally would be scared. And I think you need to reevaluate. The other area that concerns me here is a lot of people, and there is nothing wrong with this in my opinion, and that's a debate for a scenario where we can talk openly, is they use split tunneling. I understand with all of these people home, if they wanted to surf the internet from their corporate machine and you allowed them to do that through the VPN or through your remote access through the corporation, the cost would be astronomical. So a lot of organizations enabled split tunneling so that they're surfing through their home internet and they're doing their work through that remote connectivity. But a lot of the organizations I talk to have not spent the time to go back to make sure they've set it up securely. And really what they've done is put a bridge on their home network between the company's assets and the employees' assets, and again, hostile environments. With the fact, if you talk to a lot of cyber insurers, you can hear them say that they are adding language to their policies that say, if you get breached through one of your employees' home networks, you may not be covered. That's not a global statement for all insurers, but we hear about that a lot. And we want to make sure that people are actually paying attention to that. Because you may think you have coverage, you may think that's not a big deal, but it may be a very big deal for you and your organization. And let's be honest, adversaries know this. So now what are they doing? They're starting to target our personal email addresses. They're not targeting the email addresses as much that have all of those corporate controls. They're targeting your personal email, whether it be Hotmail or Gmail or out, whatever it may be. That's what they're going after. Why? Well, in my opinion, it's pretty simple. If I can take control as an adversary of an asset in an individual's home, especially a targeted asset, there is a good likelihood they're working from home, especially if they're a knowledge worker, especially if they're in technology or IT. And I potentially can use the access I have into their home now because they clicked on links, they installed my malware in their environment to go through and get into the corporation. And that could be a much, much easier path than they've had before. So how do you achieve all of this while adopting security strategies? How do you let people work from home while trying to minimize exposure? Well, that's through education. As an individual, we have to be diligent in everything we do. And as a corporation, we have to do our best to adopt frictionless security strategies and practices. We have to take what's complex and make it simple so people understand the what and why. And then we have to monitor, test, and train. And ultimately, we cannot be complacent here. This is a major area that we need to focus on. And I want to give you all a really interesting example. You have an employee that works from home. You potentially, and there's two scenarios here, you've potentially given them a very powerful, nice, brand new, shiny laptop. They bring this device home and it's amazing. It's fast, it's light, it's sleek. You've given potentially other monitors, a keyboard, mouse, and a printer to use. And one of their children, their spouse, someone else who lives in the home, is doing online education. And their computer is old and maybe not working very well. That employee goes, you know what? Son, daughter, mother, father, uncle, whomever's in their home, go ahead and use my machine for your education because you're taking classes in the evening. It won't impact my work. Is that okay? I'm not saying it's not, but is that okay? And if you don't do the proper education with your employees, and then you find out an employee is utilizing a corporate asset to do non-corporate work and you want to terminate them, that's a problem. Even if you want to discipline them, that's a problem. Have you told them what they should be doing? Have you re-emphasized or even reviewed your own acceptable use policies? Again, how people used assets when they were in an office as compared to working from home is completely different. Let's do the flip opposite of that. You've sent someone home a laptop that's old, right? It's 4 or 5 years old. For whatever reason, these devices were hard to come by in 2020. Unless you were a big buyer, you may not have had the resources to get them. So your employee's looking at this laptop, really old machine, and going, well, I can't use this. It's not powerful enough for me. But the machine I happen to have in my house is very powerful. So I'm going to do my work on that machine. And then I'll just use my personal email. I'll send whatever it is back over. I'll use some connection and send the information back to my corporate email address or, my corporate file share that's in the cloud if you're doing those kinds of things. Is that a problem? Is that okay? It's probably not malicious, but it ties back to that insider threat that we were talking about, and that how key it is when you're looking at the environment and when you're looking at what you've done and now your long-term strategy, that you go back through and you train. That train is so important, and it's continual. And you provide that information and you think through these things. The other big one that comes up a lot when I'm giving private consultations is, how do you monitor assets that you've put in people's homes? How do you make sure that you provide the right security for the company, but you're not infringing on people's privacy inside of their homes? And that is a big question that does not have a single answer. You need to work with your privacy officer. If you do not have one inside of your corporation, working with your law department, working with your outside counsel, or going to industry and getting advice from those of us who are fortunate enough to have privacy officers, ethics officers, and legal counsel, and try to get that advice. The final thing I will leave with everybody here is, we are one team. No matter what company you work for, whether we're competitors or not, we in security are one team. We in development are one team. We in IT are one team. We're on the side of good. None of us should be fighting, and we should all be collaborating. And we can collaborate without giving away corporate secrets. If you let people know that you're doing this collaboration, I promise you, if you come at it with the right attitude, what you will learn and take away from those meetings back in your company will not only help you do things better, faster, cheaper, and more securely, they will help you on a personal level grow in your career. And I promise you, there are plenty of us out there that would love to learn from you. So get involved, especially now. Get involved in the email lists that are out there. Get involved in the communities that are out there. Get involved on the social media platforms designed for business. And again, I'm not here to advocate or denounce any of them, but there are plenty of those out there that we're all a part of. I thank you all very much. I wanted to keep this short and sweet. I wish you all the best in 2021. If I can ever be of assistance, please reach out. Stay secure, but please do not forget the personal side of this, and good luck.
Hey everybody, happy Tuesday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article that looks at the attitudes toward agile development in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Agile methodologies came onto the scene about 10 years ago, and since then, the technology has advanced by leaps and bounds, and we've experienced many challenges around the way that we work. And 2020 has definitely proven that. Through everything, Agile has been a part of the app dev conversation. Agile has been, adapting to fit our individual needs. However, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed Agile in a different way by providing renewed respect for the Agile mindset. The Agile mindset refers to the 4 core values that combine to establish a set of attitudes held by those embracing agility. Make people awesome, deliver value continuously, make safety a prerequisite, and experiment and learn rapidly. This article looks at each of those core values and how they became more relevant in 2020 and what the future may hold for Agile development. And we also have an article that offers some sage advice around cloud migration monitoring. Almost every organization has transitioned some operational systems to the cloud. DevOps professionals are an essential part of migration projects, facilitating the migration itself and making sure applications work as expected and perform well after the migration. And to make cloud migration a success, monitoring must be done correctly. Applications must be monitored at every stage of the migration, when the application is still running on premises, during migration, and once the new workload is running in the cloud. This article explains key metrics to track during cloud migration, offers up some monitoring considerations at every stage of the migration cycle, and covers some of the tools included at no cost by the major cloud providers that can help organizations monitor their migration. All right, over on Container Journal, we have the second in a series on Kubernetes maturity. The first article in the series introduced the Kubernetes maturity model and discussed how to prepare for Kubernetes. The next phase in the journey to achieving Kubernetes maturity is transformation. Preparation includes getting buy-in from the organization to invest in Kubernetes. If you haven't received the buy-in from your business, this article advises you to take a step back. It's critical the business is aligned with your goals, as you most likely won't see visible results on the first day. This article looks at the various things worth considering in the Kubernetes maturity model, from language and architecture to technical transformation, and the need to balance flexibility with control, and what organizations need to do to get to phase 3 of their Kubernetes maturity model. And we take a look at why Kubernetes is such a good fit with DevOps culture. Mark Hornbeek expands on his earlier post describing the 9 pillars of engineering DevOps of Kubernetes. Specifically, he explains that collaborative culture is a core pillar of well-engineered DevOps. No technology, not even one as popular as Kubernetes, will achieve success without the right culture. Fortunately, he writes, Kubernetes is truly a win-win for developers because Kubernetes complements exemplary DevOps culture, and vice versa. This article offers up numerous examples to illustrate the positive relationship between Kubernetes and DevOps culture, not the least of which is delivering clear benefits for technical and business stakeholders across the value stream. All right, over on Security Boulevard, Sue Paremba suggests the best way to stop password reuse is simply by going passwordless. Heresy. No, not really. According to a study from Ivanti, 1 in 4 consumers use a work password and/or work email when accessing consumer websites, ranging from restaurant orders to dating apps. The use of work credentials for personal activities puts the company at risk of a cyber attack. The threat has grown worse with so many people working remotely and using those same credentials for IoT and across multiple personal devices used for both work and play. The answer? No passwords. The study advocates for a passwordless future and says companies should eliminate passwords altogether and instead enable mobile device authentication with biometric-based access. Passwordless multi-factor authentication can provide a seamless user experience for employees and significantly reduce the risk of data breaches. This article takes a look at the pros and cons of going passwordless and whether it's really a good option for organizations today or in the future. And we also have an interesting article about the security considerations of smartphone cameras, especially for organizations. Although the camera is arguably the most popular and useful component on a phone, securing its output is an often overlooked piece of an organization's security strategy. For one, camera phones allow nearly instantaneous surveillance or data loss, since the data capture tool is always present. And it's been proven that a smartphone can be hacked and the camera used surreptitiously to gather information. The risks associated with a smartphone's camera and supporting applications need to be directly addressed within an organization's security policy. The key to mobile security is not just managing devices, the article notes, but also the tasks being performed with those devices. Organizations must look at how they are protecting the data generated by a smartphone, including images and information snapped by the camera. And finally, we have a first-person account written by a Chief Information Security Officer that discusses the 3 hiking principles that he says made him a better CISO. The article was written by Jack Ham, who is VP of Infrastructure and CISO at Gigamon. He says a career in cybersecurity is a never-ending path of trial and error, and to be a true leader in this space, you are expected to have all the right answers, especially when an enterprise finds itself at its most vulnerable, at the hands of a cyber criminal. Jack spends a lot of time hiking in the Sierra Nevada mountains or in Death Valley, and he has come to 3 important realizations during his time outside the office that have ultimately made him a better CISO. It's a different take on leadership in the security space, and he makes some really nice analogies in this article. It's definitely worth a read. All right, that's it for today's headlines. I'll be back on Thursday with a fresh new batch for you. Until then, have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Chetan Mathur, who is the CEO of a company called Next Pathway. Chetan, thank you so much for joining me today on TechStrong TV. Really appreciate having you here.
Great. Thank you for having me, Charlene. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So I wonder if we can start by you telling me a little bit about your company. I'm not that familiar with you.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Next Pathway is a company that I founded about 10 years ago. I'm the founder and CEO of the company. And we've been building software that helps our clients to plan and automate their migrations from legacy enterprise data warehouses and data lake technologies like Hadoop to modern cloud platforms. And some of the platforms I'll just mention that we work very closely with are our friends at Snowflake, Microsoft Azure, AWS, and so on.
Okay, great. So you guys recently put out a survey, or you surveyed, I think it was about 1,000 or so IT decision makers on their kind of cloud migration efforts. And so wondering if we can discuss some of the results of that survey and see how maybe that kind of impacts the market, or at least gives us a window into what organizations are doing in their cloud migration efforts. So tell me give me a little bit of background, please. If you will, on the survey itself. Is this the first year that you guys have done it, and what were your what was your end result, if you will?
Sure. As early adopters of the cloud and the belief in what the cloud offered, Charlene, with respect to unlimited compute and storage and so on. We found ourselves back a few years ago struggling with the fact of our clients were still hung up on the fact that, they were in that mindset that the cloud wasn't secure, right? And that goes back probably about 3 to 5 years or so. What we decided to do is, now that we started seeing a great deal of interest in cloud migrations, we thought, let's go survey a top 1,000 Fortune 1,000 companies and ask them, where their heads are at specifically. And we gave them a list of about 25 or so questions. And we had some very interesting findings. And I'll just start with one of them, just around the security side, if you don't mind. 80% of the companies actually trust their applications now to run on the cloud over running on premise. So that was a very interesting finding and a big mind shift.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge. I would think, because, to your point, we've been talking about cloud security for a number of years, and it's still very much a large topic on Security Boulevard, our security site, cloud migration and cloud security. So that's a huge shift. And what do you attribute to that? Is it just the fact that we've kind of matured as an industry, or do you see other factors at play?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the cloud, the hyperscalers, as we call them, they've done a fantastic job in two ways. Obviously, in building and the robustness of the security and getting the confidence, because they're spending literally billions of dollars, as you know, on securing their infrastructure and their environments. Certainly more money than any one enterprise would ever spend on their own security platform. That's number one. Mm-hmm. And then number two is they've been able to communicate that to the C-suite as well through numerous activities and briefings and those type of things. So I think that's been the biggest mind shift, is the investment that they've made and how solid their communication strategy has been to the executive suite.
That's interesting. Okay, so the interviews that you conducted, were they? What was the time frame for them? I'm trying to kind of frame this in, COVID, post-COVID, pre-COVID. What, when is it that the conversations actually happened?
Yeah, the conversations, we conducted the survey in December of 2020, so very recent. The data is very fresh, and we wanted to do it in COVID, if you will, environment. Mid-COVID. Yeah, in COVID. Where we all want to be post-COVID, don't we?
Exactly. Yeah.
But we wanted to get the pulse of what these folks are thinking right now, because as you know, the pandemic, there's always silver linings and bad things. The pandemic really has accelerated, shall I say, the migration to the cloud. So some of our clients and some of the respondents were cloud ready and they were ready to go, and others were not quite there as well. So another important point that came out was nearly half of the respondents are migrating 20 plus applications this year in 2021 to the cloud. So that number was actually surprising and stood out to me as well, Charlene.
Yeah, I can imagine. So do you see a lot of these cloud migration efforts happening as a direct result of COVID-19 and that rush to, dare I say the term, digitally transform their organizations, or is it something that has been kind of on the minds of many organizations for a long time and they just thought the time was right?
Yeah, I think it helped, honestly. I don't know the exact answer to that, but, with the way that we're planning it in our business is that we think that, migrations will continue, 5+ years out for sure before, enterprises are fully migrated to the cloud. However, I think that this pandemic has really exposed a lot of cracks, shall I say, in certain enterprises, and the need to digitize is the right word, has been, and the companies that were built for the pandemic, as they say, the Amazons and the Walmarts, as you can see how they're taking great advantage of that. So the pandemic certainly has accelerated the migration process.
I imagine for some organizations, though, just the complexity of cloud migration migrating to the cloud has held some organizations back, either in part or in whole. So is that something that came out in the survey as well? I mean, do you still see organizations that are just kind of like, no, this is just going to be too much for us to handle?
Yeah.
Or do you go ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry. Absolutely. And that was one of the reasons that we conducted the survey, Charlene, was really to find out what are some of the, top 3 or 4 reasons or hurdles, shall I say, that are preventing our customers from migrating to the cloud. And not surprisingly, approximately a third of them just said, listen, our technology, our data warehouses and our data lakes are so old, that data warehouses specifically are so old and so integral to the running of our business in the data warehouses, number one. And number two, who's consuming from the data warehouse? So, if you ask a business person, what reports you're consuming, they're going to say, I need them all. And, I run them every day. And in some cases that's true, and in other cases it's false. And so the single biggest limiting factor was just simply understanding what's inside of their data warehouses. And then with data lake technology, with Hadoop and things like that, that's about 10-year-old technology. Mm-hmm. And we know that the proverbial data lake has become a data swamp. So it's newer technology, but there's just been a vast amount of data that's been kind of put into Hadoop, and many clients now are struggling to say, hey, listen, this has gotten too big and too expensive. And so more than half of the respondents, commented about Hadoop and said, don't know what's in there, and it's gotten way too unruly and too expensive to run.
There's got to be some way of helping them kind of manage that data lake, or at least understand better what they do have in there. Do you think that that's maybe going to be a large undertaking for companies this year, is just kind of understanding what they have so that they can move forward in their cloud migration efforts? Or are we kind of like stuck in quicksand, if you will?
Yeah, no, and that's exactly the reason for Next Pathway. And we have a technology that we launched about 18 months ago, which is called Crawler 360. And as the name suggests, it allows our clients to make data-driven decisions on how to migrate. So let me be specific. It does three things. It allows our clients, first of all, to look inside data warehouses and data lakes and understand the table lineages and the table dependencies and those type of things. It also allows our customers to be able to see who's consuming from which tables. And then lastly, where that data is being loaded from. So from which mainframe systems and that's been loading. And so we are able to show a visual representation from end to end, from data loading, from source data to right through to consumption. And so that's been a invaluable technology and solution that our customers are just eating up, because it's giving them the purview now and saying, oh gosh, now I understand exactly what's inside of my data warehouse or data lake.
That's pretty cool. So, real quick, when you guys are talking with your customers or with IT organizations in general, do you hear more organizations say that migrating applications to the cloud is more daunting than entire workloads, or vice versa? Or do we have kind of a healthy mix of the two? They're both daunting, and I'd much rather just go, I don't know, sit on the couch and watch a movie or something like that.
Yeah, let me try that. So we're focusing in right now specifically on BI and analytics reporting applications. So the Teradata's, Netezza's, Hadoop's of the world. And now what we're starting to see, over the last few months is folks really starting to attack the mainframe, where there is some big, complex legacy workloads that are very sophisticated, and people saying, hey, listen, I want to start to migrate off of my DB2 and my mainframe. So, first generation of entrants to the cloud, or folks that are migrating to the cloud, I think focused more on the BI and analytics reporting. And the reason's obvious, because, just from compute power, it's so inexpensive and so powerful. You really have infinitum compute. And now our clients are starting to ask about the mainframe.
All right. Cool. Well, I hope that we continue to see a healthy movement in the cloud migration space in general. I think 2021 will definitely kind of set the path, if you will, for many organizations who may not have maybe moved as quickly as they could have or should have in 2020 to the cloud. So hopefully we'll see more action happening in 2021, but in a good way overall. Not so much in that move of desperation, but it's more of a positive, this is good for my business move. So Chetan, thank you so much for your insight and for walking me through the report today. I really do appreciate it, and I wish you guys the best of luck.
Great, thank you for having me again, Charlene. It was a pleasure.
Great. All right, everybody, we've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so please stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. solutions. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Mike Potter, who is the CEO of a company called Rewind. Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Hi, Charlene. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having us.
Great. So tell me a little bit about Rewind.
So Rewind is a cloud-to-cloud backup provider for SaaS solutions. We started 5 years ago backing up Shopify stores. Okay. We've expanded since then to cover BigCommerce, QuickBooks Online, and recently bought a company that does backups for GitHub as well. We've got plans to back up, most of the popular SaaS solutions that short-term roadmap would include things like Trello and Zendesk, and then longer-term, really any SaaS provider, any SaaS solution that you can think of, Rewind wants to be backing that data up. So backing up SaaS applications and sites like GitHub, that just kind of trips me up when I think about it. I'm like, yeah. Why would you want to do something like that? But seriously, why would you want to do something like that? Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think backups for SaaS is like isn't that why you use SaaS? So that you don't have to do backups. That's why the cloud exists. Right. Get rid of a lot of your IT infrastructure and throw it up into the cloud. The reality is that most SaaS providers actually have a shared responsibility model that they follow for data protection. And so they have a backup. All the platforms that we support have backups. But they're backups at a macro level, at a system level, right? They're kind of like an all or nothing approach to backups. If the whole system goes down, if a meteorite hits the servers, if there's a fire, if there's some sort of natural disaster, absolutely they have a backup. Mm-hmm. But the thing is if your account has a problem on it, going into that backup and pulling out the literally, the needle in the haystack of the piece of information that you need in order to recover your data, that's just not what that backup is designed for. Mm-hmm. It's really an all or nothing approach. And so Rewind provides those account level backups and allows businesses to protect their information that resides on those SaaS applications.
I see. So is this an appliance? Is this a piece of software? Or how does the technology work?
So it's a cloud solution that we run, and essentially you sign up for Rewind and then you connect all of the accounts that you're looking to back up. We've modeled it after Apple's Time Machine. So there's very few options. There's no software to install. There's no configuration. There are no options in the product. Mm-hmm. That's really all you need to do. Sign up for the account, link your SaaS applications, and then we start backing up that data and copying it and giving you access to it so that you can, recover it in case something happens to it.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned that your company just recently acquired a company that does GitHub backups. What made you guys move in that direction?
I think we have a vision to back up the entire cloud. So any SaaS application that's out there, the company was doing very well. They were a team of 3 developers that had around 1,000 customers. So they built an established business that was doing quite well. And we have a system internally that we've developed over the last year to prioritize the next platforms that we're going to back up. Right? We started on Shopify and then added BigCommerce, then added QuickBooks. We want to get really good at making sure that we pick the right platform. We don't want our developers to be wasting time building solutions for a platform that nobody's going to use. And so we've built this internal model that we've got that allows us to score new platforms. We look through market demand. We look through Google searches. We look through community posts. We look through Twitter posts and Reddit threads and all sorts of indications to see what is the demand for this product going to be. Mm-hmm. And as we looked and scored GitHub, it actually scored really high on our model.
There was a lot of demand for it. There were a lot of people asking for that solution. People had built open source solutions that did part of it that they had released on GitHub. We saw a lot of evidence of demand. In addition to that, it's a really unique problem because often for SOC 2 compliance or ISO 27001, you have a requirement to have a backup of your most important systems. And software and source code would certainly fit into a most important system. And so as we looked at all of that, we thought there was a really good alignment with, the vision of where Rewind wanted to go, of the business that they had built already and the success that they had had. There was a culture alignment as well. The people fit. They were a team of 3 people. Give you a sense of size, like Rewind is a team of 60, now up to 70 people. So it was a digestible size from an acquisition perspective, and all of that resulted in us pulling the trigger earlier this year.
Gotcha. All right. So when your technology, when you guys go about actually backing up all these SaaS applications, what exactly is it that you guys are backing up? Is it just the information, that the data that is associated with that particular account, or are you actually doing, the entire SaaS application, kind of maybe not really snapshotting it, but backing up the application itself and the data that resides within it? Is that what you guys are doing, or is it mostly just that data information, that the customer information that's in there?
I mean, what we back up changes on every platform, and it's essentially the data that is in that platform. So we don't have access to the source code or anything like that. But for GitHub, we do back up the source code, like the code that people are putting into GitHub, as well as the metadata around that. So any issues that they might have added into there, all the other comments, some of the wikis, that type of information we're putting into we're backing that information up as well. On Shopify and BigCommerce, it's your product catalog, your orders, your customers, the look of your store, the theme, the categories, the organization, etc. And QuickBooks is everything in the QuickBooks. Also all the financial transactions, all of the attachments, etc. So essentially, the idea of Rewind is we want to make sure that your data is protected. And so we back up any piece of data that we can get our hands on that's related to the platform that we're backing up. Sometimes that'll change, like with Zendesk, for instance. Zendesk is it's a massive product. It's got a ton of different things that you can back up. And what we're going to back up and what we're going to restore, we have to be very selective in how we start and go to market on that. So we'll start with a few items and then we'll expand it over time. And that's a fairly typical process for us, where let's get the most important things backed up, and then we'll add value over time to continue to make sure that the entire thing is backed up. But we'd rather, start and provide a solution that at least covers some of the most important pieces of information, as opposed to waiting until the whole thing is covered.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And the idea of backing up the SaaS application actually makes a lot of sense also. And it really surprises me that there haven't been other companies, at least that I know of, that have taken this approach. Why do you think it's taken so long? I mean, and God bless you guys for doing it yourself. But, it seems like, if it's something that, we're talking about companies' critical data. So why hasn't something like this been available before? Are we talking about just, advances in the technology? We've gotten to the point where it can be done, or was it just kind of one of those maybe blank or, invisible spots that people just kind of overlooked?
There's a company a number of years ago called Backupify that really started the trend here. They did backups for Google Docs and Google and Gmail and things like that. Those companies, there's actually quite a few companies that'll do backups for Google Docs, Office 365, and other companies that are doing backups for Salesforce.com as well. And those 3 platforms tend to get the majority of the attention, the majority of the investment, and the majority of the focus, really, of data. We've just taken the approach that, SaaS is more than just those 3 platforms, that really all of your data needs to be protected, not just the 3 sort of main platforms. And so Rewind's focus happens to be most of the tools that are not those three to begin with. I think eventually what we're seeing and hearing from customers is that they want a single pane of glass to back up all of their SaaS data. Companies want one provider that will provide protection across all of the SaaS services that they're using. And that's clearly the direction that we're going. So eventually, I'm sure we'll add in those major platforms that others are covering right now. The focus for us just happens to be on the SaaS platforms where there's very little attention being paid to them.
All right. Well, see a need and fill it. That's the best business plan you can do. So, Mike, thanks so much for walking me through the technology and where you guys are in the space and just the whole the backing up SaaS applications. It honestly was something that hadn't really occurred to me, but it makes a whole lot of sense. So I do appreciate you walking me through it, and I wish you guys the best of luck.
Thanks, Charlene. It was great being here.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
All right, next up we have the Analyst Corner with Mitch Ashley. Always an insightful conversation that he has, and just a great one. Let's give it a listen.
Welcome to Analyst Corner. Mitch Ashley, CEO with Accelerated Strategies Group. If you've ever heard me talk before, you probably heard me mention this idea that oftentimes in digital transformation, what we do is we replicate what or how we do it today, just in a digital form. I've often used conferences as an example. Sometimes you go to the virtual events and you'll see a layout that looks like you're walking into the Moscone Center, and very similar experience for the rest of your time there. Now, there's certain things that aren't very easy to replicate as part of that, like all of the great networking that we do at those conferences. But that demonstrates some of the limitations of that approach. So I'd like to share with you sort of the picture beyond that and my 3 stages of transformation. That first stage is replication, where we take a process, an experience, an activity, and we pretty much take the form of it and in the substance of it and recreate that in a digital form. I gave the conference experience. This is a great one. There are many, many others. And that's a great way to kind of move into a digital environment. Maybe you can improve costs, reduce your costs, improve your profitability doing it like that. Obviously, offering it in a different form, in a digital form, is going to be attractive to customers for various reasons, including the COVID world that we're in today. The second stage is innovation. So what happens in this process is, everybody can replicate what we do today. The real question is, how do you change it? How do you make it better? How do you leverage the fact that you're using a different medium in the case of digital transformation? And that interaction may be completely different. That might be a minor bolt-on to a current interaction that you do, say curbside delivery. I remember when the pandemic started, I needed a new computer, couldn't find what I wanted because everybody was buying them for their homes. And so I built one, and I built it from parts from 2 Best Buy stores in the Denver area. And the only way I was able to do that was they had curbside delivery. And I was very impressed because this is really, really very soon, right after we went into lockdown. Best Buy had enhanced their mobile app and enhanced their website to add this curbside delivery. I'm in this location, here's what kind of car I'm in, et cetera. I don't remember quite exactly what the experience was. It evolved over time, but they changed that game and innovated how they use technology in just a small way. And it can be, very significant ways, different ways of delivering service. And in that innovation phase, there are people that are looking to really gain an advantage, increase their customer experience, interaction, to leverage the fact that they are digital. And that could be successful. And of course, there's, I'm sure, things that fail. But in this digital environment, we obviously can react more quickly if we have teams that can deliver software quickly. So from that, you emerge into this third phase of acceptance, the new norm, not the new normal, but the new norm of how we do that kind of thing. You can kind of see this in the hotel business, where we had the B&B before we went digital, and now we have VBRO and different online ways of scheduling. Well, you start to see some of the hotels offering very similar kinds of experiences to remain competitive. You see it in grocery stores, where you have shoppers that will do shopping for you to keep you engaged and keep your business at their store or with their company. And that becomes the new norm. And that's why I say that once we go digital, we're not going back. We're not going to go back to all retail locations. First of all, it's going to be hugely expensive to rebuild our businesses back in all those store locations that we've shut down. There will be new store locations. In 2020, there was 9,000 plus retail locations that closed, but there were still 3,600 or so that opened their new locations as well. So they may not have been in the same form, but they're either in that transition or sort of this new acceptance of what life will be like. What will that be in our world today for digital? Maybe some of those things are already being established through online platforms for doing digital e-commerce. Maybe it's some things that are emerging, like Walmart making part of the retail floor space actually into their warehouse for packaging and putting together online orders for local distribution. That may be the new model. Maybe that actually overcomes and we have a much smaller retail interface. We'll have to see what that looks like. But things like that, if to take that example, if Walmart is doing that, maybe Target has to do that too. Maybe the other locations that are in similar businesses will have to do that as well. We'll see. But that's that third stage. This is the new acceptance of how we do that kind of business. Doesn't mean everybody does it exactly the same way, but it's a pattern that gets replicated and built on across the industry. So think about that as you're going through your digital transformation. We replicate what we do today, we innovate, and you can be the innovator or you can be a fast follower or slow follower to other innovators. And then that acceptance stage. And this cycle goes and continues to repeat itself as well. So it's not a one-time loop, if you will. Thank you for listening today, and wish you the best on your digital journey.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
All right, welcome back, everybody. And our final segment today, which is the View with Vizard. Mike Vizard talks to Sam Cochran, who is the senior software engineer at BuildKite. And he explains how big an impact Apple machines based on ARM processors will have on software development. Could be a game changer and a great conversation. So let's give it a listen.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Sam Cochran, who's the senior software engineer for BuildKite. We're going to be talking about all things ARM processors. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mike. It's great to be here.
So we saw Apple has now embraced ARM, and we see a lot of ARM at all these different endpoints that are out there. Everybody's talking about edge computing. How do you think all of this is going to change the way people think about software development?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So I was kind of excited to get my hands on one of these new Apple laptops, and I think they've kind of lived up to the hype. But it was the missing piece in the puzzle in terms of an end-to-end ARM development workflow, I think. So there's been a few different laptop makers having a go at getting ARM laptops into people's hands. There's the Surface ARM and those sorts of things. So there's been a little bit of coverage, but the missing piece has been the Apple story. and lots of developers still using macOS. It's still a great way to build software. So now that we've got that piece as well, we've got developers that are building software for all sorts of platforms, but increasingly ARM platforms on ARM devices, which is great because as anybody who's written tests knows, if you write the tests and they are going to run in the same environment that you're going to build your actual software in, you get a much happier result. So yeah, increasingly devs are building software for mobile devices, and obviously that's where all this ARM stuff has come from. And all the benefits that have bubbled up and made it a strong contender there are now bubbling up and making them strong contenders elsewhere. So like the power efficiency and the vertical integration of being able to grab those ARM designs and build chips that actually work in the devices you're using them in works great in mobile and has translated beautifully everywhere else. So up into laptops, again, I've got one of these laptops that's great. It really holds true. But also those benefits apply everywhere you want to run software in the cloud as well. So AWS have given it a good go with all these Graviton processors. The same vertical integrations work great there. They're cheaper to run because they use less power. They can stick more cores in them. They can design them to suit and integrate beautifully with cloud computing and virtualization and all those sorts of things. So it's easier to run there. And they can push it out to the edge as well. And all those interesting workflows and workloads that are slightly differently shaped. They can build chips that suit them perfectly, which is great. So we're seeing lots more deployment targets of different types, which is interesting. And as we're increasingly targeting these different devices with our software that we want to run, same as it's important to develop it on the same sort of architectures, we need to test it on the same sort of architectures too. So yeah, that's kind of where we're seeing it become more common in terms of the flow, the DevOps flow of getting software built, tested and deployed in production. It's sort of all starting to align on ARM, and that means it's really possible to tell a compelling story and keep the software quality up by keeping that architecture the same across and throughout.
Do you think developers will wind up with multiple machines that they'll use for different workflows? Because they'll have one that's ARM based, and then they'll do something on Intel, and Intel will have a different platform, or will they switch back and forth, or is it just too costly to do that? But it seems like it would be convenient if you could.
Yeah, I mean, I also still have an Intel Mac, but I tell you, I haven't touched it since I set up my new one. The good thing is that the tools have come along really quickly, and it's pretty easy to run different architectures in multiple places. But that's all well and good for doing the exceptions. But I think for the biggest cases, you want to try and keep that alignment. So for example, Docker came to the party pretty quickly and built a translation layer so they can do Intel and ARM architectures pretty easily on the Mac. And it's pretty transparent. So you can still run Intel stuff, but yeah, once you're starting to build majority ARM stuff, it's best to keep alignment with whatever is the biggest piece you're doing and keep that escape hatch for the exceptions, because when they're not aligned, that's when things, errors creep in and things that aren't expected start to happen. So I don't think we're likely to see fragmentation. I think targeting devices is more interesting. Like we definitely still see a lot of exercising the actual devices that people are trying to deploy software to in a mobile space. That's a totally different story. So definitely having a test environment, a rich test environment that lets you exercise each of those things on those test devices is super important still.
Do you think we're going to see a lot more workloads out at the edge as we go forward from here? It seems like a lot of people are talking about edge computing. It seems like there's 4 or 5 different flavors of it. Are we going to get to a point where maybe there's more workloads running at the edge than there is in the cloud? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I kind of think the edge is the cloud still. But yeah, you're just sort of pushing it closer to the devices. So I think that's kind of interesting. I think that's going to be pretty transparent because people are still going to be pushing software to the cloud. It's just that the cloud is going to push that software closer to the edge where the consumers are. Maybe the shape of the software has to be slightly different so that it can be pushed out to those edges. But in practice, like more and more folks are just picking up and letting you run containers at the edge. And that's what you're running in the main cloud workload anyway. So I think that's going to be more common. I think edge computing gets interesting when you consider, really differently shaped workloads. So stuff like, Apple pushing out image recognition stuff onto devices itself, seeing some of that come back into the edge a little bit when those devices aren't quite powerful enough. Those differently shaped workloads and the way that processors can now be built to suit them is interesting. But I think for the most part, software development is going to look the same. And it's the sort of processes in the middle that are going to translate that and adapt it and push it out to more places.
Do I have to be more aware of the latency of my workload if I'm moving stuff out to the edge? I mean, everybody talks about microservices, but it seems to me ultimately what people are trying to do is process and analyze data at the point of capture and maybe the point at where it is used. But that seems to me requires a fair amount of finesse. Do you think developers get that? DevOps teams will get that? Or is that going to be a big challenge?
Yeah, I mean, latency is interesting on two fronts, right? Because one of the primary benefits that we want out of edge computing, and I'm acutely aware of this as an Australian, is that pushing workloads out closer to the edge means it's far more responsive for the clients that are trying to use it. Over here, if you're using a US East data center, because that's the default, you're getting about half a second of latency to my device. And that's the erosion that we want to see, is that latency go away. And then obviously there's the other end of latency, which is up in the actual cloud. If you're depending on some primary database and it's across the world, then that latency is important too, and especially in a microservice world when you're communicating between lots of different services. For sure, those are all factors. I guess it's up to the architecture and what problems you're trying to solve, right? So I think, again, a lot of the edge computing that we're seeing at the moment, at least in the space that I'm familiar with, is containers are being built and pushed out to lots of different places. And as long as, while crafting that sort of DevOps flow, you're considering, where is my primary data store? Where are these microservices talking to? There's definitely ways of architecting that make sure that the latency within the cloud is acceptable, while still giving that client latency benefit. I think it's all a balance, and it's very unique to the problem space that you're actually trying to work in.
What do you think cloud computing is evolving into? Because it used to be, AWS, and now I've got all these little micro clouds out at the edge, and there's going to be clouds in between, right? I'm going to put workloads in the middle to kind of make things kind of work. If everything's a cloud, then maybe, we can just go back and call it enterprise computing, or, do we need this term cloud? What does it mean?
If everything's a cloud, nothing's a cloud.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of great. Computers are just computers, really. And I guess we had this big movement of trying to shift the maintenance burden and the operational overhead of maintaining those computers to some centralized source. So if that centralized source then figures out that it's easier to push those pieces out, and then other folks realize that, oh, hey, actually the way that they're doing it, they've done the hard work of figuring out how to do this well, we can replicate that model. Maybe there will be fragmentation. Maybe we'll see more providers popping up and more computers going in more places. And this sort of generalization of workload for edge computing is going to apply for generalized workloads across clouds as well. I think there's still some pretty compelling services that, folks talk about cloud vendor lock-in and stuff a lot. There's still some pretty compelling ways to build applications that are deeply integrated into whatever cloud you choose. So avoiding that sort of lock-in is going to be interesting. But then we see stuff like Kubernetes saying, no, actually, don't worry about the particular cloud. Let's try and build an abstraction that moves across clouds easily. Maybe we'll see folks consolidating on something like Kubernetes and deciding that that's a great way to provide these generalized services that will ship across things. And I think that is a pretty promising direction for stuff like edge computing, having the ability to run transparent Kubernetes workloads wherever, close to your clients, and with some sort of backhaul, connecting them all when they need to be connected up in the cloud as well. Maybe that'll be across clouds too. I think that's a really interesting direction to explore, and I'm keen to see some decentralization as well. I think things are very centralized, but we'll see how it goes.
Let me explore that a little bit with you. People talk about GitOps all the time, and in my mind, it's kind of like, well, we used to push the workload out to some device and hope for the best, but each device, each platform was a snowflake, and it didn't really work all that well. Now, if we have Kubernetes on the outside, can we just pull stuff from the CI/CD platform or wherever it is automatically, and when that platform is ready. And so it's rather than pushing code, can we automate the process and pull stuff more from the edge out from the platforms? I mean, I'm a layman here, so I'm trying to describe it as best as I understand it. But is there a shift going on between a pull and a push here, and a yin and a yang? What's going on?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, the GitOps stuff, there's definitely a breed of tool that is popping up where, developers are used to a particular workflow involving Git, and using that to kick off changes to deployment environments is familiar, and it's easy to work with. I guess Git has a couple of different, those sorts of tools have a couple of different models for doing things. There's definitely push and pull solutions. I don't know if that'll have a meaningful impact. If you were explicitly trying to set up a particular architecture for a software application or a suite of software, I guess you could build various Kubernetes environments and have them pull stuff down. I think push is more likely in that sort of scenario. I still think we're going to have stuff pushed out to each of those edges as appropriate. And honestly, that still feels like the most successful way to design software is to be very intentional and upfront about that sort of architecture. I don't think abstractions like Kubernetes are really nice, but I don't think that obviates the need for very intentional architecture choices in these sorts of things. Yeah.
All right, great. Hey, Sam, thanks for being on the show. You never know what unintended consequences there are. You put some ARM together, some Kubernetes, and who knows what will happen next. But I'm looking forward to the future. How about you?
Yeah, it's an exciting world. I'm looking forward to it too.
All right, great. Sam, take care, and thank you all for joining us once again.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
All right, everybody, that wraps up today's TechStrong TV broadcast. I hope everybody had a great time watching today's conversations. We had a lot of really, really great ones today. I was especially enamored with the Predict 21 virtual summit conversation that Matt Newfield had. Great conversation, and definitely, if you didn't get a chance to check it out, please do. We will be back on Thursday with a brand new episode for you. And until then, I hope everybody has a great day, and please stay safe.